Adrian Cole built an empire on blood and silence, but nothing prepared him for the 3-year-old girl staring at him with his own eyes. On a frozen Christmas Eve, the city's most feared businessman discovers the child he never knew existed. The woman he destroyed still loves him, and the past he buried alive is standing on a snow-covered sidewalk, holding his daughter's hand. Some debts can't be paid in money. Some choices can't be undone. And some truths will either save you or destroy everything you've become. Before we begin this journey of redemption, betrayal, and the kind of love that refuses to die, I invite you to stay until the very end. If this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's step into Adrian Cole's world, where power means nothing when you've lost everything that matters. The snow fell like broken promises over Manhattan. Adrian Cole stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office, watching the city transform into something clean and forgiving beneath the white blanket. 23 stories below, Christmas Eve unfolded in all its traditional chaos, families hurrying through the streets with wrapped packages, couples laughing under street lamps, children pressing their faces against shop windows filled with everything their hearts desired. He felt nothing. The whiskey in his hand had gone warm, untouched for the better part of an hour. Behind him, his office sprawled in deliberate darkness, illuminated only by the glow of the city and the dying embers in the fireplace. Oak desk, leather chairs, walls lined with first editions he'd never read, and art he'd never really looked at. All of it expensive, all of it meaningless. Adrian was 42 years old, and he owned half of New York's underground economy, import-export businesses that laundered money from Boston to Miami, nightclubs that served as fronts for operations most people couldn't imagine, real estate holdings that gave him leverage over politicians, judges, and police captains who'd long ago stopped pretending they couldn't be bought. He'd built an empire, and he'd done it alone. "Mr. Cole?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, hesitant. "It's nearly 7. Will you need anything else tonight?" Adrian didn't turn from the window. "Go home, Marcus. Be with your family." A pause. "Sir, are you sure you don't want—" "I'm sure." The intercom clicked off. Adrian heard the outer office door close moments later, followed by the elevator's distant chime. Then silence settled over the building like another layer of snow, cold and complete. He should leave. Should go to one of his clubs, surround himself with noise and people and the kind of artificial celebration that helped a man forget he was celebrating nothing. But his feet remained rooted to the expensive carpet, his eyes fixed on the streets below where life happened to other people. Christmas Eve, the worst night of the year. It had been 4 years since the divorce. 4 years since he'd signed papers that dissolved a marriage he'd destroyed through neglect, ambition, and the kind of single-minded focus that built fortunes and ruined everything else. 4 years since he'd last seen Lena Parker. No, she'd gone back to her maiden name, he remembered. Since he'd last seen the woman who'd loved him when he was nobody, who'd believed in him when he had nothing but hunger and dreams. She'd asked him to choose, family or empire, her or the life he was building in the shadows. He'd chosen poorly. Adrian drained the whiskey in one burning swallow and turned from the window. Enough. Enough drowning in memories that changed nothing. The past was dead, and he'd killed it himself. No amount of expensive liquor or silent reflection would resurrect what he'd buried. He grabbed his coat, black cashmere, Italian, worth more than most people's monthly rent, and headed for the elevator. Movement. That's what he needed. Action. Anything but this suffocating stillness that turned his penthouse into a mausoleum. The streets greeted him with biting wind and the kind of cold that found every gap in even the most expensive clothing. Adrian turned up his collar and walked without direction, letting the city pull him along. Around him, New York celebrated. Shop windows glowed with warm light. Salvation Army volunteers rang bells on corners. A group of carolers harmonized outside Rockefeller Center, their voices rising sweet and clear above the traffic. He walked faster, as if he could outpace the loneliness. 20 minutes later, he found himself in a neighborhood he didn't immediately recognize. Not the gleaming towers of Midtown or the calculated grid of the districts where his businesses operated. This was somewhere in between, working-class apartments with wreaths on doors, corner bodegas still open, the kind of place where people actually lived rather than just existed. Adrian slowed, suddenly aware he'd wandered farther than intended. He should call his driver, get back to familiar territory. But something made him keep walking, drawn by instinct he didn't understand toward the small park at the end of the block. The playground equipment stood empty and ghostly beneath the snow. A few benches lined the walking path. Street lamps cast pools of amber light that seemed warmer than they had any right to be. And there, on the sidewalk just beyond the park's entrance, a woman stood with a small child. Adrian's heart stopped. Even from a distance, even bundled in a winter coat with her dark hair tucked beneath a knit hat, he knew her. Would have known her anywhere, in any crowd, after any amount of time. The way she held herself, the tilt of her head as she looked down at the child, the grace in her movements as she adjusted the little girl's scarf, all of it achingly familiar. Lena. His feet moved before his brain could engage, carrying him closer. She hadn't seen him yet, focused entirely on the child who was pointing excitedly at the snow-covered playground equipment and tugging at her hand. "Just for a few minutes, baby," Lena was saying, her voice exactly as he remembered, warm, patient, with that hint of music in it. "Then we need to get home before the storm gets worse." The little girl nodded eagerly and started toward the swings, her small boots leaving tiny prints in the fresh snow. And that's when she turned, giving Adrian his first clear look at her face. The world tilted. Dark eyes. Not brown, not quite black, but that distinctive shade of deep gray blue that Adrian saw every morning in his own mirror. A determined set to her small jaw. The exact shape of her eyebrows, the precise curve of her cheekbones, features that belonged to no one else. His daughter. He knew it with absolute certainty, with the kind of bone-deep recognition that bypassed logic and doubt. This child was his. 3 years old, maybe 4, bundled in a purple coat with snowflakes caught in her dark hair, laughing as she reached for the swing. His daughter. His child. A human being he'd helped create and never known existed. Adrian must have made some sound, a gasp, a word, something, because Lena's head snapped up. Their eyes met across 20 feet of snow-covered sidewalk, and he watched every emotion play across her face in rapid succession. Shock, fear, anger, pain, and beneath it all, something that looked almost like grief. "Adrian?" His name left her lips barely above a whisper, but he heard it clearly in the sudden stillness. The city noise faded away. The world contracted to just the three of them in a small park on Christmas Eve, connected by truth that had been hidden for years. He took a step forward. She instinctively moved between him and the child, protective, her whole body tense. "Lena." His voice came out rough, uncertain. "Is she—" He couldn't finish the question, couldn't make his mouth form words for the reality crashing down on him. Lena's jaw tightened. She glanced back at the little girl, who was happily pumping her legs on the swing, oblivious to the adult drama unfolding nearby. When Lena looked at Adrian again, her eyes held 4 years of anger and hurt. "Her name is Mila," she said quietly. "She's 3.5. Adrian's mind raced backward, calculating dates. 3.5 years, which meant Lena had been pregnant when they divorced, had been carrying his child when he'd been too consumed with building his empire to notice, too focused on meetings and deals and consolidating power to see what he was losing. "Why didn't you tell me?" The words came out accusatory when he meant them as anguish. "Tell you?" Lena's laugh was bitter and sharp. "When, Adrian? When you were disappearing for days without explanation, when you came home at 3 in the morning smelling like other people's fear? When you chose every single meeting, every single deal, every single piece of your precious empire over me? I had a right to know." "You had a right?" Her voice rose slightly, and she checked herself, glancing at Mila again before continuing in a fierce whisper. "You gave up your rights when you walked away from our marriage without ever looking back. I found out I was pregnant the same week our divorce was finalized. I tried to call you once. Your assistant said you were too busy to be disturbed. That you'd left instructions not to be contacted about personal matters. So I took the hint." The words hit him like physical blows. He remembered that time, the immediate aftermath of the divorce when he'd thrown himself into work with desperate intensity, using deals and expansion and the construction of his criminal empire as a wall against feeling anything at all. He told Marcus to screen his calls, to keep Lena away if she tried to reach him. He'd been protecting himself, and in doing so, he'd lost 3.5 years of his daughter's life. Lena, He took another step forward, hands raised in a gesture of surrender or pleading or both. I didn't know. God, if I'd known. You would have what? She cut him off. Suddenly become a different person? Suddenly decided that family mattered more than power? Don't insult both of us with fantasies about what you would have done. Mommy! Mila's voice rang out clear and happy. Push me higher! But Lena's expression softened immediately as she looked at her daughter. In a minute, sweetheart. Keep swinging just like that. You're doing great. Adrian watched her with the child, saw the love and patience and complete devotion in every movement, every word. This was what he'd thrown away. This was what he'd convinced himself didn't matter as much as building his empire. A woman who loved him. A family. A life that meant something beyond power and money and fear. I want to know her. His voice came out raw, stripped of the authority he used in boardrooms and back alleys. Please, Lena. I want to know my daughter. Lena studied him for a long moment, and he saw her weighing every broken promise, every abandoned dream, every night she'd raised Mila alone against whatever she saw in his face now. Finally she sighed, a sound full of exhaustion and reluctant compassion. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from here, she said. The Grindstone. Meet me there in an hour. Mila will be at my sister's for the evening, and we can talk. Really talk, without... She gestured vaguely at the playground, at their daughter, at the impossible situation unfolding in real time. I'll be there. Adrian meant it as a promise, as an oath, as the most important commitment he'd ever made. Lena nodded once, sharp and businesslike, then turned back to Mila. Come on, baby. Time to go see Aunt Rachel. But, Mommy... I know, sweetheart. We'll come back tomorrow, I promise. As Adrian watched them leave, Lena taking Mila's small hand in hers, the two of them walking away through the falling snow, he felt something crack open in his chest. All the walls he'd built, all the careful distance he maintained from feeling anything too deeply, all the protection he'd constructed against vulnerability, suddenly crumbled like they were made of nothing more substantial than the snow beneath his feet. He had a daughter, and he'd missed her entire life. The hour passed in a blur of aimless walking and spiraling thoughts. Adrian found himself moving through the streets without seeing them, his mind consumed with images of everything he'd lost. First steps he'd never witnessed, first words he'd never heard, birthdays and scraped knees and bedtime stories and all the tiny, precious moments that made up a childhood, all of it happening without him. By the time he pushed through the door of the Grindstone, he felt hollowed out and rebuilt simultaneously, emptied of everything except the desperate need to somehow make this right. The coffee shop was small and warm, decorated with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Only a few customers occupied the tables, a young couple sharing a piece of pie, an elderly man reading a newspaper, a barista wiping down the espresso machine. Lena sat in the back corner, a cup of tea in front of her, her coat folded over the chair beside her. She'd taken off her hat, and her dark hair fell in waves around her shoulders. She looked older than he remembered. Not in a bad way, but in the way that living and struggling and surviving alone aged a person. There were faint lines at the corners of her eyes, a weariness in the set of her shoulders. But she was still beautiful, still the woman who'd stolen his heart when they were both too young to know what they were promising each other. Adrian slid into the chair across from her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The barista approached, and Adrian ordered coffee he didn't want just to give his hand something to hold. She looks like you, Lena said finally, her fingers wrapped around her mug. I knew she would, from the moment I found out I was pregnant. Knew she'd have your eyes, your stubbornness. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. She has your temper too, God help me. Tell me about her. Adrian leaned forward, needing to know everything, to somehow compress 3.5 years into a single conversation. Please, tell me everything. Lena took a sip of tea, gathering her thoughts, or her courage, or both. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady, full of the kind of love that came from years of devotion. She was born on July 23rd. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. dark hair from the start. The nurses kept commenting on it. She didn't cry much as a baby, just watched everything with these serious eyes, like she was trying to figure out the world. Lena's smile grew more genuine. She walked at 10 months. Early, the pediatrician said. Just stood up one day and decided she was done crawling. She loves books. Has me read the same stories over and over until I have them memorized. Her favorite is about a little girl who befriends a dragon. She makes me do different voices for all the characters. Lena paused, her eyes distant with memory. She's fearless, climbs everything, tests every boundary, pushes every limit. And she's kind, so incredibly kind. Shares her toys with other kids at the park, wants to help with everything, cries if she thinks someone is sad. Adrian listened, absorbing every detail, building a picture of the daughter he'd never met. Each fact felt precious and devastating simultaneously. Precious because Lena was giving him this gift of knowledge. Devastating because he'd missed living these moments himself. What does she know about me? He asked when Lena paused. Does she wonder? She knows she has a father, Lena said carefully. I told her that her daddy had to go away for work, that he didn't know about her. She met his eyes directly. I didn't want her to think you abandoned her, that you knew about her and chose not to be there. So I told her a version of the truth, that you didn't know, but if you did, you'd love her. The words hit him hard. Even after everything he'd done, everything he'd chosen, Lena had protected him in Mila's eyes, had given him grace he didn't deserve. Thank you, he managed, for that. For not... Thank you. Lena nodded acknowledgement, but didn't smile. I didn't do it for you, Adrian. I did it for her. Every child deserves to believe their parents love them, even if the reality is more complicated. It's not complicated, Adrian said with sudden intensity. I love her. I know I haven't earned the right to say that I don't even know her yet, but the moment I saw her, Lena, the moment I saw her, I knew I'd do anything, to be part of her life. Words are easy. Lena's voice hardened slightly. You were always good with words, Adrian, promising things, making plans, swearing you'd change. But actions, actually showing up, actually being there day after day after day, that's what matters. That's what being a parent is. I know. Do you? She leaned forward, her eyes fierce. Do you really? Because being a parent means 3 a.m. fevers and terrible twos and giving up every single selfish impulse for the sake of another human being. It means putting her needs before your meetings, her bedtime before your deals, her safety before your empire. Can you do that? Can you really look me in the eye and tell me you're capable of putting Mila first? The question hung between them, weighted with 4 years of broken promises and abandoned dreams. Adrian thought about his life, the late-night meetings, the dangerous deals, the constant calculation of risk and reward that governed his every decision. He thought about the world he inhabited, where violence and betrayal were currency and trust was a liability. Could he bring a child into that? Should he? But then he thought about Mila on the swing, laughing in the snow. Thought about 3.5 years of moments he'd already lost. Thought about the emptiness in his penthouse and the hollowness of every achievement that had led him to standing alone at a window on Christmas Eve with nothing but expensive whiskey for company. I don't know if I can, he said honestly. I don't know if I'm capable of being what she needs. But Lena, I swear to you, I swear, I want to try. I want to learn. I want the chance to be her father, even if I have no idea how to do it, especially because I have no idea how to do it. Lena studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. Sincerity, commitment, proof that this time would be different. Adrian held her gaze, letting her see everything. The regret, the longing, the desperate hope that somehow, impossibly, he could find a way back from the choices that had brought him here. One chance, Lena said finally. You get one chance, Adrian. Not for me. We're done. That ship sailed 4 years ago. But for Mila, you can meet her properly. You can start building a relationship with her. But the first time you disappear, the first time you choose your business over her, the first time you break a promise or make her feel like she doesn't matter, we're done. Permanently. I won't let her go through what I went through, wondering if her father loves her or if she's just an obligation he fits in between more important things. I understand. I mean it, Adrian. I will cut you out completely before I let you hurt her." "I understand," he repeated, and he did. Understood that Lena was offering him something precious and fragile, something that couldn't survive another round of his negligence and broken promises. "When can I meet her? Properly, I mean. Not just—" He gestured vaguely, indicating their accidental encounter at the park. Lena pulled out her phone, checking the calendar. "Tomorrow, Christmas. Come to my apartment at 2. I'll have explained who you are, prepared her as best I can. But Adrian—" She looked up at him with an expression that broke his heart. "Go slow. She's 3. She doesn't understand complicated adult situations. All she knows is that she has a father who's been gone, and now he's here. Don't overwhelm her. Don't make promises you can't keep. Just be gentle." "I will." Adrian wrote down the address she gave him, committing it to memory even as he typed it into his phone. "Thank you. For this chance. For letting me try." Lena stood, gathering her coat. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me in 6 months if you're still showing up. Thank me in a year if Mila trusts you. Thank me in 5 years if you've actually managed to be the father she deserves." She left before he could respond, walking out into the snow-filled night with the kind of quiet strength that had first attracted him to her a decade ago. Adrian sat alone at the table, his coffee growing cold, his mind racing with everything that had just happened. He had a daughter. Tomorrow, he would meet her. Tomorrow, his entire life would change. The barista was turning off lights, clearly ready to close. Adrian left cash on the table, too much, but he barely noticed, and stepped back out into the cold. The snow had intensified, and the streets were nearly empty now, most people already home with their families. Adrian walked back toward his penthouse, but the route felt different somehow. The same buildings, the same streets, but he was seeing them through different eyes, noticing the toy stores and the playgrounds and the family restaurants in a way he never had before. The city wasn't just territory to control and profit from anymore. It was a place where his daughter lived, where she went to parks and read books and built a life he knew nothing about. By the time he reached his building, a plan was forming. Not the kind of calculated strategy he employed in business, but something more instinctive and urgent. He needed to become someone different, someone worthy of being Mila's father, someone who could exist in her world without dragging his darkness into it. The elevator ride to his penthouse felt longer than usual. Adrian unlocked his door and stood in the entrance, really looking at his space for the first time in years. Everything sharp edges and cold surfaces. No color, no warmth, no indication that a human being with actual feelings lived here. It was a showpiece, a declaration of wealth and taste and power. But it wasn't a home. Could it be? Could he transform this space into somewhere a child might feel welcome? Or did the problem run deeper than decor? Was he himself too far gone, too corrupted by the choices he'd made and the world he'd built? Adrian poured himself another whiskey, then, after a moment's consideration, dumped it down the sink. Tomorrow he needed to be clear-headed, present, fully aware of every moment. He couldn't afford to numb himself against feeling, not anymore. Not when he had a daughter to meet and a life to reclaim. He spent most of the night at his window, watching the snow fall over the city and thinking about the little girl with his eyes. Wondering what she liked for breakfast, what made her laugh, whether she was sleeping peacefully in whatever apartment Lena had built for them, or if she woke up sometimes in the night needing comfort. Wondering if he could possibly become the kind of man who deserved to be called her father. Christmas morning arrived cold and bright. The storm had passed, leaving everything covered in pristine white that sparkled in the sunlight. Adrian dressed carefully, not in one of his usual expensive suits, but in dark jeans and a charcoal sweater. Casual, approachable, the kind of thing a normal father might wear. He stopped at a toy store on the way, then stood paralyzed in front of hundreds of options, having no idea what a 3-year-old girl might want. Finally, he settled on a stuffed dragon, remembering Lena's comment about Mila's favorite book, and a set of colorful building blocks that the clerk assured him were age-appropriate. The gifts felt inadequate. How did you sum up 3.5 years of absence in toys and apologies? But it was something, a starting point. Lena's apartment building was in Brooklyn, in one of those neighborhoods where families actually lived rather than just invested. Adrian climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, his heart pounding harder than it had during any business negotiation or dangerous deal. He'd faced down rival criminals, stared down corrupt officials, built an empire through willpower and calculated risk. But standing outside apartment 3C with a stuffed dragon in his hands, he'd never been more terrified. He knocked. Footsteps approached. The door opened, and Lena stood there, looking tired but determined. Behind her, he could see a living room that was nothing like his penthouse, warm and cluttered with books and toys, artwork clearly created by small hands taped to the walls, a worn but comfortable couch covered in colorful pillows. "Come in," Lena said quietly. "She's in her room. I told her you were coming, that you're her father, that you didn't know about her before, but you want to meet her now. She's—" Lena paused, choosing words carefully. "She's excited and nervous, so please, Adrian, remember what I said. Be gentle." Adrian nodded, his throat too tight for words. He stepped inside and Lena closed the door behind him. "Mila," she called down the short hallway. "Sweetheart, there's someone here to meet you." A door opened. Small footsteps pattered on hardwood, and then she appeared, the little girl from the park, now wearing a red dress with white tights, her dark hair pulled into two ponytails tied with green ribbons. She stopped at the edge of the living room, one hand gripping the door frame, her gray-blue eyes fixed on Adrian with curiosity and caution. "Hi," she said softly. Adrian's knees nearly buckled. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. She had his eyes, his jaw, even the way she tilted her head when examining something new. He'd seen that exact expression in his own mirror 1,000 times. "Hi, Mila," he managed, his voice rough. "I'm Adrian. I'm your father." She considered this, her small face serious. "Mommy said you had to go away." "I did, but I didn't know about you. If I had—" He stopped, not wanting to make excuses or burden a 3-year-old with adult complications. "I'm very, very happy to meet you now." Mila's eyes dropped to the stuffed animal in his hands. "Is that a dragon?" "It is." Adrian knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. "Your mom told me you like dragons, so I hoped you might like this one." She approached slowly, reaching out to touch the dragon's soft purple scales. "What's his name?" "I don't know," Adrian admitted. "I thought maybe you could name him." "Smokey," she said immediately, taking the dragon and hugging it against her chest. "Because he breathes smoke. Can I show him my room?" "If it's okay with your mom." Mila looked at Lena, who nodded with a small smile. "It's okay, baby. Show your father your room." And just like that, with the easy acceptance of childhood, Mila took Adrian's hand, her small fingers wrapping around two of his, and led him down the hallway to her room. It was a riot of color and imagination. Purple walls covered with stickers and drawings, a bed shaped like a race car, bookshelves overflowing with stories, a corner devoted to stuffed animals, now gaining a new purple dragon. Mila narrated everything excitedly, showing him her favorite books, her drawing of what she insisted was a unicorn, but looked more like a horse with a traffic cone on its head, her collection of rocks from the park. Adrian listened to every word, absorbing every detail, trying to memorize this moment because he knew it was the most important of his life. Not closing the deal that made his first million, not establishing control over his territory, not any of the achievements he'd once thought defined him. This, his daughter showing him her room, this was everything. "Do you have to go away again?" Mila asked suddenly, looking up at him with those eyes that were mirror images of his own. The question pierced him. Adrian knelt down so they were face to face. "No," he said firmly. "I'm not going away. I'm going to be here, as much as your mom allows. I want to know you, Mila. I want to be your father, if you'll let me." She studied him with that serious expression, and he could almost see her young mind working through what that meant. Then she held out Smokey the dragon. "Smokey says okay," she declared. "But you have to come to the park with us and read me stories. Mommy does all the voices." "I'll do all the voices," Adrian promised, and meant it more than any promise he'd ever made. They spent the afternoon together, the three of them, like a family that had existed in some parallel universe where Adrian had made different choices. Lena made lunch while Mila showed Adrian every toy, every book, every treasure she owned. They went to the park, where Adrian pushed Mila on the swings until his arms ached, and she laughed with pure joy. They came back to the apartment and read stories, and Adrian did his best with the voices, even though Mila gently corrected his dragon impression 3 times. And through it all, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of rightness, of being exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Not building empires or accumulating power, but sitting on a worn couch reading about dragons and princesses to a 3-year-old girl who had his eyes and his stubbornness and deserved so much better than the father she'd gotten. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Mila grew sleepy, curling against Lena's side with Smokey clutched in her arms. Adrian sat across from them, watching, trying to commit every detail to memory. "I should go," he said quietly. "Let you get her to bed." Lena nodded, carefully extracting herself from beneath Mila's weight. "Mila, sweetheart, say goodnight to your father." Mila's eyes opened halfway. "Will you come back?" "Yes," Adrian said without hesitation. "If it's okay with your mom, I'll come back tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day after that." "Promise?" The word hung in the air, weighted with every broken promise of his past. Adrian looked at Lena, saw the warning in her eyes, the reminder that this child's trust was precious and fragile. Then he looked back at his daughter, at the hope and exhaustion in her small face. "I promise," he said. And this time, he meant to keep it. Mila smiled sleepily and closed her eyes. Lena walked Adrian to the door, stepping out into the hallway with him for a moment of privacy. "She likes you," Lena said, her voice carefully neutral. "That's good, but Adrian..." "I know. I have to earn this. I have to prove it. I will." He met her eyes directly. "I know you don't believe me yet. I know you have every reason not to. But I swear to you, Lena, I'm not the same man who walked away from our marriage. Or maybe I am, but meeting Mila, it's changed something. I can't go back to who I was before I knew about her. I don't want to." Lena searched his face for a long moment. "We'll see," she said finally. "Come back tomorrow. 3 o'clock. We'll take her to the Natural History Museum. She loves the dinosaurs. And Adrian? Don't be late." "I won't be." He meant it as a vow, as a promise, as a commitment written in something more permanent than words. As he walked down the stairs and out into the cold evening air, Adrian felt the weight of what he'd gained and what he still stood to lose settling over him like a second skin. He had a daughter. He had been given a chance, one chance, to be part of her life. And in accepting that gift, he'd accepted everything that came with it. The responsibility, the vulnerability, the terrifying possibility of failing someone who depended on him in ways that had nothing to do with money or power. The city stretched out around him, familiar and foreign simultaneously. His empire was still out there, the businesses, the deals, the dangerous men who answered to him, and the even more dangerous ones who didn't. Tomorrow he'd have to face that world again. Have to figure out how to exist in both spaces. The father who read dragon stories, and the man who controlled half of New York's underground economy. But tonight, for the first time in 4 years, Adrian Cole walked home knowing he had something worth protecting, something more valuable than all the power and money he'd accumulated, something that made every risk he'd ever taken seem small and meaningless by comparison. He had a daughter who called her dragon Smokey and corrected his voices and asked if he'd come back tomorrow. And he would. He'd come back tomorrow and every day after, for as long as she'd let him, because this time, finally, impossibly, desperately, he had something to come back to, something worth choosing over everything else. The museum's great hall swallowed them in shadows and wonder. Mila stood frozen beneath the Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton, her small hand gripping Adrian's with surprising strength, her mouth forming a perfect O of amazement. The massive fossil loomed above them, suspended in mid-stride as if it might shake off millions of years and resume its hunt across the marble floor. "He's so big," Mila whispered, her voice tiny in the cavernous space. Adrian knelt beside her, following her gaze upward. "She," he corrected gently, remembering something he'd read once in a life that felt very far away. "Scientists think this one was female. They named her Sue." "Like Aunt Rachel's friend?" Mila's eyes remained fixed on the skeleton, wide with wonder. "Maybe. But this Sue lived a very long time ago, before there were people or cities or anything we know now." Lena stood a few feet away, watching them with an expression Adrian couldn't quite read. She'd been quiet since he arrived at the apartment, cordial but distant, as if she was reserving judgment on whether this was real or just another performance from a man who'd proven himself capable of spectacular disappointment. They moved through the fossil halls slowly, Mila leading them from exhibit to exhibit with the fearless curiosity of childhood. She asked 1,000 questions. Why did the Triceratops have 3 horns? Where did all the dinosaurs go? Could they have dragons now if they still had dinosaurs then? And Adrian answered what he could, admitted ignorance when he couldn't, and felt something in his chest expand with each moment. This was his daughter. This small, brilliant, endlessly curious human being carried his DNA and his eyes, and apparently his tendency to ask questions that had no easy answers. The reality of it kept hitting him in waves, each one stronger than the last. Can we see the blue whale? Mila tugged at his hand, already pulling him toward the Hall of Ocean Life before he could answer. They stood beneath the massive model whale suspended from the ceiling, its blue-gray body seeming to swim through the air itself. Mila's neck craned back at an impossible angle, and Adrian found himself reaching out to steady her, his hand naturally finding the small of her back. "Mommy says whales sing to each other," Mila said, her voice full of wonder. "Do you think they sing songs like we do?" "Maybe," Adrian said. "Maybe they tell each other stories about where to find food, or where they've traveled, or about their families." "I'd like to hear a whale song." Mila looked up at him with those gray-blue eyes that were mirrors of his own. "Can we go see real whales sometime?" The question caught him off guard. Sometime. As if she assumed he'd still be there in the future, available for whale-watching trips and adventures. As if his presence in her life was already a given rather than a fragile thing that could shatter with one wrong move. "I'd like that," he managed. "If your mom says it's okay." Mila turned to Lena with pleading eyes. "Can we, Mommy? Please?" Lena's expression softened the way it always did when she looked at their daughter. "We'll see, baby. Maybe in the summer, when it's warmer." They spent 2 more hours in the museum, wandering through halls of gems and minerals, meteorites, and ancient civilizations. Adrian bought Mila a stuffed triceratops in the gift shop. She named it Rocky immediately, and watched as she carried both her new dinosaur and Smokey the dragon, one in each arm, chattering to them about everything they'd seen. Outside, the afternoon had turned cold and gray, threatening more snow. Lena pulled Mila's coat tighter and adjusted her scarf, maternal movements so practiced they were almost unconscious. Adrian watched, memorizing the gesture, adding it to his growing collection of moments that made up the life he'd missed. "I'm hungry," Mila announced, her energy finally flagging. "There's a pizza place around the corner," Lena said, glancing at Adrian. "If you want to join us." It wasn't quite an invitation, more like an acknowledgement that he was there and could continue being there if he chose. But Adrian heard the test beneath the words. Would he stay for the mundane parts too? The tired child, the ordinary meal, the unglamorous reality of family life? "I'd love to," he said. The restaurant was loud and cheerful, filled with families escaping the cold. They squeezed into a booth, Mila between them, and ordered a pizza with half plain cheese for Mila and half mushroom and olive for the adults. While they waited, Mila drew on the paper tablecloth with the crayons the waiter brought, creating an elaborate scene involving dragons, dinosaurs, and what she insisted was a castle, but looked more like a rectangle with triangles on top. "Tell me about your week," Adrian said to Lena, trying for normal conversation, trying to be the kind of person who existed in this world of pizza restaurants and children's drawings. Lena looked surprised by the question, as if she'd forgotten he might care about her life beyond his access to Mila. "It was fine. Busy. I picked up extra shifts at the hospital. I'm a nurse now in pediatrics. And Mila had her holiday program at preschool on Tuesday." Adrian felt the words like a punch. Holiday program. Another moment he'd missed. How did it go? She was a reindeer. Lena's smile was genuine, lit from within by maternal pride. Sang all the songs, did all the motions, waved at me 17 times from the stage. It was perfect. I wish I could have seen it. "Maybe next year," Lena said carefully. "If you're still around." The conditional hung between them, heavy with all the ways he'd failed before. Adrian wanted to argue, to insist he'd be there, to make promises. But he'd was learning, that promises meant nothing without proof. "I'll be there," he said simply. "Whatever it takes." The pizza arrived, and Mila attacked her slice with enthusiasm, sauce ending up on her nose and chin despite Lena's attempts to teach her about napkins. Adrian found himself laughing, actually laughing, at her dramatic description of the cheese being so stretchy, like 1,000,000 miles long. This was what he'd given up. Not some abstract concept of family, but this, sauce-covered smiles and terrible drawings and conversations about whale songs. He'd traded it for power and money and an empire that suddenly seemed utterly worthless. "Daddy?" Mila's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She'd started calling him that today, casually, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Each time she said it, Adrian felt his heart constrict. "Do you have a house?" "I have an apartment," he said. "In the city." "Is it big?" "Pretty big." "Bigger than our apartment." Adrian thought about his penthouse with its floor-to-ceiling windows and empty rooms. "Yes, but not as nice." Mila considered this, working on her pizza. "Can I see it sometime?" Lena tensed slightly, and Adrian understood the unspoken concern. His penthouse was part of his other life, the life of deals and danger and decisions that had no place around a child. The thought of Mila in that space made him suddenly, acutely aware of how completely separate his two worlds had been. "When I make it ready for you," he said. "Right now it's not very fun. No toys or colors or anything a kid would like. But I'll fix it, and then yes, you can visit." "Will you get dinosaurs?" "I'll get whatever you want." Mila beamed at this promise, already planning, her young mind imagining his space transformed into something magical. Adrian met Lena's eyes over their daughter's head and saw the warning there. Don't promise what you can't deliver. Don't build her hopes up just to crush them. He nodded slightly, acknowledging the caution. Then he pulled out his phone and opened a notes app, typing quickly. "Okay, Mila, let's make a list. What should I get for my apartment so you'll want to visit?" Mila's eyes lit up. She started listing items with the abandon of childhood: books, art supplies, a telescope to see the stars, a special chair just for her, chocolate chip cookies always in the kitchen. Adrian wrote down every request, no matter how elaborate or impossible, because this was the easy part. The concrete things he could buy and arrange and deliver. The hard part would come later. The showing up. The being present. The choosing this over everything else, day after day, moment by moment, until it became who he was, rather than something he had to consciously decide. They finished eating as the winter darkness fell outside. Mila was fading, her energy depleted by the museum and the excitement. Lena bundled her back into her coat and gathered their things. "I'll walk you home," Adrian said, and Lena didn't argue. The streets had that hushed quality that came with impending snow. Adrian carried Mila when she got too tired to walk, her head heavy on his shoulder, her breath warm against his neck. She weighed almost nothing and everything. This small person trusting him enough to fall asleep in his arms, it was a responsibility more profound than anything he'd ever carried before. At Lena's building, he handed Mila carefully back to her mother, watching as Lena shifted their daughter's weight with practiced ease. "Thank you," Lena said quietly, "for today. She had a good time." "So did I." "Adrian," Lena paused, choosing words carefully. "I can see you're trying. I do. But this is just the beginning, the easy part even. It's showing up for the hard days that matters, the sick days, the tantrum days, the days when she's not a perfect angel and being a parent isn't fun." "I know. Do you?" Her eyes searched his face. "Because in a few weeks, the novelty is going to wear off. Being a parent becomes routine, and routine becomes boring, and boring becomes exactly the kind of thing you used to abandon for something more exciting." The words stung because they were true. Adrian had never been good with routine, with the mundane patience that real commitment required. He'd always been chasing the next deal, the next challenge, the next thing that made him feel alive and powerful. "I'm not that man anymore," he said, knowing even as he spoke that actions would have to prove what words couldn't. "We'll see." Lena adjusted Mila's weight against her hip. "Come by tomorrow around 10. We're staying in, supposed to snow again. You can help me keep a restless 3-year-old entertained indoors." It was another test, Adrian realized. Another chance to prove he could handle the unglamorous reality of parenthood. "I'll be there," he promised. He walked home through streets that felt different now, populated by possibilities he'd never noticed before. Every parent he passed pushing a stroller, every family bundled together against the cold, every lit window showing dinner tables and living rooms, all of it suddenly, painfully visible. This was what he'd been missing while building his empire. This ordinary, extraordinary world of connection and belonging. His penthouse greeted him with its usual cold elegance. Adrian stood in the entrance and saw it through Mila's eyes. All sharp edges and empty spaces, beautiful but sterile, impressive but utterly unwelcoming to a child. She'd been right. It wasn't fun. It was a showpiece, a trophy, a declaration of success that had nothing to do with life actually lived. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the list Mila had dictated. Books, art supplies, telescope, special chair, cookies. A child's wish list, innocent and trusting. Adrian added items to an online cart, ordering everything for rush delivery. Then he kept shopping, softer furniture, warmer colors, photographs of nature and animals instead of abstract art. Things that might make this space feel less like a mausoleum and more like somewhere his daughter might want to visit. His assistant called around 9. "Mr. Cole, we have the monthly meeting tomorrow at 10. All the territory managers will be there. You wanted to review the quarterly numbers and discuss expansion into—" "Cancel it," Adrian said. Silence on the other end. "Sir?" "Cancel the meeting. Reschedule for next week. Something came up." "Mr. Cole, these men have flown in from 4 states. Some of them have—" "I don't care." Adrian's voice came out harder than he intended. "Tell them I apologize, but it can't be avoided. Next week, same time. That's final." He hung up before Marcus could argue further. In his old life, this would have been unthinkable. You didn't cancel on the men who ran your empire. You didn't prioritize anything above the business that generated your power. But Mila had asked him to be there at 10, and he'd promised, and this time, keeping that promise mattered more than anything else. The snow started around midnight. Adrian stood at his window watching it fall, thinking about the little girl asleep in Brooklyn who had his eyes and his stubbornness and deserved a father who would actually be there. Thinking about the life he'd built and whether any of it was worth keeping if it meant losing this chance. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he recognized but hadn't heard from in months. Victor Reyes, one of his oldest associates from the early days when Adrian was clawing his way up through New York's underworld. Victor ran operations in Queens, controlled the ports, and had a reputation for violence that made even hardened criminals nervous. The message was brief. "Need to meet. Tomorrow. Important." Adrian stared at the text, his jaw tightening. Victor never reached out unless there was a problem, and Victor's problems tended to involve the kind of situations that required immediate attention and absolute discretion. In his old life, Adrian would have responded instantly, would have rearranged everything to handle whatever crisis was brewing. But tomorrow he'd promised to be in Brooklyn at 10, keeping Mila entertained indoors while snow fell outside. He typed back, "Can't tomorrow, next week." The response came immediately. "Not next week, tomorrow. You'll want to hear this." Adrian felt the familiar pull, the gravity of his empire demanding attention, asserting priority, reminding him that power required constant vigilance. But then he thought about Mila's face when she asked if he'd come back, about the way she'd fallen asleep on his shoulder, trusting him completely, about Lena's warning that the hard part was choosing them over everything else. "Next week," he typed again. "That's final." He turned off his phone before Victor could argue further. Morning arrived bright and cold, the city transformed by fresh snow. Adrian dressed in jeans and a sweater again, deliberately leaving his expensive suits hanging in the closet. That version of himself, the power broker in Italian tailoring, had no place where he was going. The packages had started arriving at 6 a.m., delivery people hauling boxes into his apartment with varying degrees of confusion. Books and art supplies and a child-sized telescope. A purple armchair that matched Mila's room. A cookie jar shaped like a dragon. Stuffed animals and building sets and puzzles. Everything Mila had requested and more. Because Adrian was discovering that having the power to make his daughter happy was better than any deal he'd ever closed. He spent an hour rearranging furniture, making space for the child-sized chair by the window where Mila could see the whole city spread out below. It looked absurd in his minimalist living room, this explosion of color and whimsy among the sleek surfaces and expensive art. But it also looked right somehow, like his space was finally becoming a place where life could actually happen. By 9:30, he was in Brooklyn, standing outside Lena's building with a container of hot chocolate and a bag of pastries from the bakery she used to love when they were married. Small gestures, but genuine ones. The kind of everyday thoughtfulness he'd forgotten how to offer. Lena answered the door in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked beautiful and tired, and real in a way that made Adrian's chest ache with everything he'd lost. "You're early," she said, taking the coffee and pastries with something that might have been gratitude. "I didn't want to risk being late." Mila appeared behind her mother, still in her pajamas, dragging Smokey the Dragon and Rocky the Triceratops. "Daddy, can we build a fort?" The request was so normal, so wonderfully mundane, that Adrian felt something shift in his chest. "Absolutely. The best fort ever built." They spent the morning transforming Lena's living room into an elaborate structure of blankets and pillows, couch cushions and chairs. Mila directed the construction with surprising authority, declaring what went where, vetoing designs that didn't meet her specifications. Adrian followed orders, learning that architecture as dictated by a 3-year-old followed very different rules than anything he'd studied. Lena watched from the kitchen, allegedly doing dishes but mostly just observing them, and Adrian wondered what she was thinking, whether she was seeing echoes of the man she'd married before his ambition consumed everything. Whether she believed this version of him could last, or if she was just waiting for the inevitable moment when his other life reasserted its priority. "Now we read stories inside," Mila announced when the fort was complete to her satisfaction. They crawled inside, Adrian barely fitting in the enclosed space, and Mila produced an armful of books. They read about dragons and princesses, brave children and magical creatures, adventures that always ended happily because that's what stories for 3-year-olds promised. Adrian did all the voices, getting better with practice, while Mila corrected him enthusiastically whenever he missed a nuance. Lena eventually joined them, squeezing into the fort with coffee and cookies, and for a moment they were a family. Not the broken thing Adrian had destroyed 4 years ago, but something new and fragile and possible. Something worth protecting. "I have to tell you something," Adrian said when Mila was distracted by her toys, his voice low enough for only Lena to hear. She tensed slightly. "What?" "I canceled a major business meeting to be here. Men flew in from 4 states. It's going to cause problems." Lena studied his face. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to know. I'm choosing this. Choosing her. Choosing to be here even when it costs me." "It shouldn't cost you," Lena said quietly. "That's the point. Being a father shouldn't feel like a sacrifice you're making against your business interests." "I know, but right now, it does. And I'm still choosing it. That has to count for something." Before Lena could respond, Mila crawled over to them, her small face serious. "Are you and Daddy friends again?" she asked her mother. The question hung in the fort's enclosed space. Adrian watched Lena's expression shift through several emotions before landing on something careful and honest. "We're working on it, baby," she said. "Sometimes grown-ups have to rebuild their friendships slowly." "Oh." Mila considered this, then turned to Adrian. "You should bring Mommy flowers. That's what Prince Charming does." Adrian laughed despite himself. "That's very good advice. I'll remember that." They emerged from the fort for lunch. Grilled cheese and tomato soup, simple and perfect. Adrian helped clean up, learning where things went in Lena's kitchen, inhabiting her domestic space in a way that felt both foreign and necessary. This was real life. Not power lunches and strategic meetings, but dishes and spills and the mundane choreography of feeding a child. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again. "You can check it," Lena said, watching him. "It's not important." "Adrian, I'm not asking you to pretend your business doesn't exist. I'm asking you to find balance, to not let it consume everything." He pulled out the phone reluctantly. 7 missed calls from Victor Reyes, 3 from Marcus. A dozen texts ranging from urgent to threatening, all of them demanding immediate attention, immediate response, immediate action. "I need to make a call," Adrian said. "5 minutes." He stepped into Lena's bedroom, closing the door. Dialed Victor's number with reluctance and resignation, knowing this conversation would test every choice he'd made in the last few days. Victor answered on the first ring. "Where the hell have you been?" "Busy. What's so urgent?" "We have a situation. Dominic Santoro is making moves on the waterfront. He's—" "Handle it." Adrian cut him off. "That's why I pay you. Handle it." Silence. Then, "You don't understand. He's got backing from the Italians in Jersey. This isn't something I can just handle. We need to show force, make a statement, and we need you to—" "I'm not available." "Not available?" Victor's voice rose. "Adrian, this is your empire, your territory. You can't just—" "Watch me." Adrian's voice hardened. "I'm telling you how this is going to work now. You handle day-to-day operations. You make the decisions that need making. You only contact me for genuine emergencies, and this isn't one." "Since when?" "Since now. I'm restructuring my involvement, taking a step back from the operational side." Another long silence. When Victor spoke again, his tone had shifted to something dangerous and calculating. "You're losing your edge, Adrian. Getting soft. And in our world, soft men don't stay on top for long." "Then maybe I don't want to be on top." The words surprised Adrian even as he said them, but he realized they were true. "I have other priorities now." "What priorities could possibly be more important than protecting what you've built?" Adrian looked at the closed door, hearing Mila's laughter from the living room. "That's none of your concern. Handle Santoro however you see fit, but handle it without me." He hung up before Victor could respond and stood there for a moment, his phone still in his hand, feeling the weight of bridges burning. In his world, showing weakness invited attack. Stepping back invited takeover. He'd just painted a target on himself, and every ambitious criminal from Brooklyn to Boston would take notice. But in the living room, his daughter was waiting, and for the first time in his adult life, that mattered more than empire. When he returned, Mila was drawing at the table, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Lena stood by the window, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Everything okay?" she asked. "It will be." Adrian hoped he was right. The afternoon passed in the kind of comfortable routine he'd never experienced. They played board games designed for children. Mila won twice and insisted the games were too easy for grown-ups to understand properly. They baked cookies from a mix, Mila helping measure and stir and creating more mess than assistance. They watched an animated movie about a princess who saved herself, and Mila provided running commentary about how the dragon was lonely and just needed a friend. By evening, Mila was yawning between sentences, fighting sleep with determination. Lena scooped her up for bath time, and Adrian found himself alone in the living room, surrounded by the evidence of the day, toys scattered across the floor, blanket forts still standing, cookie crumbs on the couch. He started cleaning up, putting things away, learning Lena's organizational system through trial and error. When she emerged from Mila's bedroom 20 minutes later, the living room was mostly restored. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I wanted to." Adrian straightened the last couch cushion. "She asleep?" "Out cold. Today wore her out." Lena sat on the couch, her exhaustion evident now that she didn't have to hold it together for their daughter. "You did good today, with her, with everything." "Thank you." "But, Adrian," she looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much disappointment. "This is one day, one good day. That's not enough to build trust on." "I know. I need to know you understand what you're getting into. What being Mila's father actually means, long term. Because right now, this is still new and exciting. You're motivated by guilt and rediscovery. But what happens in 6 months when showing up isn't novel anymore? When being a parent is just routine obligation?" Adrian sat down beside her, careful to maintain distance. "Honestly, I don't know. I've never done this before. Never been good at anything that required sustained, patient attention. But Lena, I'm terrified of losing her, of missing more of her life. That fear, it's stronger than anything I've ever felt. Stronger than my ambition ever was." "Fear isn't enough either." "Then what is?" Lena was quiet for a long moment. "Love, I guess." Actually loving her more than you love your freedom, your power, your empire. Loving her enough that sacrifice doesn't feel like sacrifice anymore. It just feels like life. I'm not there yet, Adrian admitted, but I want to be. Then keep showing up, keep choosing her, keep proving it. Lena pulled her knees up to her chest, suddenly looking younger and more vulnerable. Because Adrian, I can survive you disappointing me again. I've done it before. But if you break her heart, if you make her love you and then abandon her, I'll never forgive you, and she might not either. The words landed like a promise and a threat simultaneously. Adrian nodded, accepting the terms, understanding the stakes were higher than any gamble he'd ever taken in business. Tomorrow? He asked. Tomorrow. But Adrian, maybe dial it back a little. You don't have to be here every single day immediately, all the time. That's not sustainable. And when you inevitably can't maintain that pace, Mila will think it means you don't care anymore. Start with what you can actually commit to long term. It was good advice, practical and wise, but the thought of not seeing Mila for even a day made Adrian's chest tighten with something close to panic. 3 days a week, Lena suggested, reading his face. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Consistent, scheduled, reliable. Show her you keep your commitments. Then if you want to add more time later, it'll feel like a gift instead of you pulling back. Adrian wanted to argue, wanted to insist he could maintain daily visits indefinitely. But Lena knew him better than he knew himself, could see the patterns he was blind to. And she was trying to protect their daughter from the inevitable disappointment of unrealistic expectations. 3 days a week, he agreed. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. What time? Tuesdays and Thursdays, after her preschool, 3 o'clock. Saturdays morning, 10. And Adrian, if something comes up, if you absolutely have to cancel, you call me. Not at the last minute, not with an excuse. You call as soon as you know, with honesty and a plan for when you'll make it up to her. I will. Lena walked him to the door, and they stood in the doorway awkwardly, former spouses navigating new territory. Thank you, Adrian said finally, for this chance, for letting me try. Don't thank me yet. But her expression had softened slightly. Thank me in a year if you're still here. Adrian walked home through snow-covered streets, thinking about sustainability and commitment and the difference between sprint and marathon. He'd always been good at intense bursts, the big deal, the dangerous play, the all-in gamble. But being a father required something different. Steady presence, patient consistency, showing up even when it wasn't exciting, even when other things beckoned. His apartment greeted him with its new additions. The purple chair by the window, the shelves now holding children's books, the subtle transformation from bachelor pad to space that acknowledged a child's existence. It looked better this way, Adrian thought. Less like a showpiece, more like a home. His phone showed 23 new messages. Victor, Marcus, other associates, all demanding attention. Adrian scrolled through them with detachment, seeing his empire from new distance. The deals and territories and power plays that had consumed his entire existence now looked smaller somehow. Not unimportant exactly, but not all important either. He'd spent years building something that could crumble in months if he wasn't vigilant. But Mila was something else entirely, something that would grow and develop and become more precious with time. Something that required building not through force and calculation, but through presence and patience and love. And for the first time in his adult life, Adrian Cole chose the harder path. The one that required surrendering control, admitting weakness, becoming vulnerable to loss. The one that meant being a father might cost him his empire. It was a price he was finally willing to pay. 6 weeks passed in a rhythm Adrian had never known before. Tuesday afternoons picking Mila up from preschool, her small hand in his as she chattered about finger painting and circle time and a boy named Jacob who always took the red crayon. Thursday evenings at Lena's apartment, reading stories and building elaborate block towers that Mila took profound joy in destroying. Saturday mornings at the park or the library or wherever Mila's boundless curiosity led them. Adrian learned the architecture of routine, how consistency built trust in ways grand gestures never could. He learned that being a father meant showing up not just for the magical moments, but for the ordinary ones, the boring ones. The ones where nothing remarkable happened except that he was there. He also learned that his empire didn't crumble in his absence. Marcus handled the day-to-day operations with surprising competence. Victor and the other territory managers adjusted to his reduced involvement with varying degrees of resentment. The money kept flowing, the businesses kept running, and Adrian discovered the world didn't end when he stopped treating his criminal enterprise like the center of the universe. But it was Saturday morning in mid-February when everything changed. Adrian was at Lena's apartment early, bringing bagels and coffee, looking forward to taking Mila to the aquarium. She'd been talking about seeing the jellyfish for 2 weeks straight, had drawn pictures of them in every color combination possible, had informed everyone from her preschool teacher to the grocery store clerk about her upcoming adventure. Lena opened the door with tension written across her face. No greeting, no smile, just a tight wariness that made Adrian's instincts flare. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. She pulled him inside and closed the door, glancing toward Mila's bedroom where cartoons played faintly. "There was a man here yesterday, watching the building. Big guy, expensive suit, scar across his cheek. He approached me when I was getting groceries, asked if I was Lena Parker." Adrian's blood went cold. "What did he say?" "Nothing specific, just that he had a message for Adrian Cole. That old friends don't forget, that family is precious and should be protected." Lena's voice shook slightly. "Adrian, who was he? What does this mean?" But Adrian already knew. The description matched Thomas Kane, Victor's main enforcer, and the message was clear as a knife blade. This was Victor's response to Adrian stepping back, a reminder that in their world, showing weakness invited attack. And what greater weakness than having something you actually cared about losing? "It's nothing," Adrian lied, his mind already racing through responses and countermoves. "Probably just someone trying to spook me over a business dispute." "Don't lie to me." Lena grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in hard. "I'm not stupid, Adrian. I know what you are, what you've been. I accepted you trying to be a better man, trying to be Mila's father, but I won't let your past put her in danger." "She's not in danger. I won't let—" "You won't let?" Lena's voice rose and she caught herself, lowering it to a fierce whisper. "You don't get to decide that anymore. The moment you chose to be part of her life, you brought all your choices with you, all your enemies, all your debts, all the violence you've been involved in. I was willing to overlook it because you seemed genuine. But, Adrian, if your world is coming for us, it's not. I'll handle it." "How? How do you handle men who threaten families? What exactly is your plan here?" Adrian didn't have an answer. Or rather, he had the answer his old life provided. Violence met with greater violence. Threats neutralized permanently. Problems solved with the kind of finality that left bodies in rivers. But that solution belonged to a version of himself he was trying to leave behind. The version that didn't have a 3-year-old daughter who drew pictures of jellyfish and trusted him completely. "Daddy!" Mila emerged from her room in her favorite purple dress, Smokey the dragon under one arm. "Are we going to see the fishies?" Adrian's heart clenched at the sight of her, at the pure joy on her small face, at the absolute obliviousness to the danger circling their lives. This was what he'd done. Brought his darkness into her light, contaminated her innocence with his choices. "In a little bit, sweetheart," he managed, forcing his voice steady. "Can you watch your show for a few more minutes while I talk to Mommy?" Mila nodded and skipped back to her room, humming tunelessly. The moment her door closed, Lena turned on Adrian with barely controlled fury. "You need to fix this. Whatever this is, whoever that man was, you need to handle it right now, because I will not let Mila grow up afraid. I won't let her live in a world where strange men watch our building and deliver cryptic threats. If you can't protect her from your past, then you need to walk away." The ultimatum hit Adrian like a physical blow. Walk away from Mila. Give up the best thing in his life to keep her safe. It was logical, even noble, and absolutely unbearable. "Give me 48 hours, he said. 2 days. I'll handle this permanently. I'll make sure no one from my world ever comes near you or Mila again." "How?" "You don't want to know how, but I promise you, Lena, I promise. By Monday, this will be over." Lena studied his face, searching for truth or lies or some combination of both. Finally, she nodded, sharp and reluctant. Monday. But Adrian, if I see that man again, if I feel like we're in danger for even a second, I'm taking Mila and disappearing. I have money saved. I have friends in other states, and you'll never find us. Do you understand? I understand. Good. She straightened her shoulders, visibly pulling herself together. Now take your daughter to see the jellyfish. Give her a perfect day, because it might be your last one with her. The aquarium visit passed in a surreal haze. Mila was radiant, pressing her face against the glass as jellyfish drifted past in ethereal beauty, asking 1,000 questions about how they moved and what they ate and whether they had brains. Adrian tried to be present, tried to absorb every moment, but part of his mind was already spinning through options and strategies and the brutal calculus of survival in a world built on fear. Victor had made his move, sent Thomas Kane to deliver a message that was simultaneously vague and crystal clear. Step back into line, or the people you love become leverage. It was textbook intimidation, the same tactic Adrian himself had used dozens of times against rivals and subordinates who needed reminding of their place. Now he was on the receiving end, and it was intolerable. "Daddy, look!" Mila tugged his hand toward the shark tank. "That one has so many teeth." Adrian knelt beside her, wrapping his arm around her small shoulders as they watched predators glide through artificial ocean. His daughter, his child, the single most important thing in a life that had been full of important things. And Victor thought she was a tool, a pressure point, a means of control. That was a fatal miscalculation. They had lunch at the aquarium cafe. Mila insisted on fish-shaped chicken nuggets, which she found hilarious, and Adrian listened to her chatter about every exhibit they'd seen. He memorized her laugh, the way her eyes lit up when she was excited, the unself-conscious joy she brought to everything. If this was his last day with her, he wanted to carry every detail forward. But it wouldn't be. Couldn't be. He'd promised Lena he'd fix this, and Adrian Cole always kept his promises. Eventually. When it mattered most. He dropped them home in the late afternoon, hugging Mila longer than usual, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and trying not to think about Lena's threat to disappear. "See you Tuesday, sweetheart," he said, pressing a kiss to her dark hair. "See you Tuesday, Daddy." Lena walked him to the door, her expression hard. "Whatever you're planning, Adrian, be smart, be final, and don't tell me about it." He nodded and left, already pulling out his phone as he hit the street. The first call went to Marcus. "I need a meeting with Victor Reyes tonight. Tell him it's urgent and tell him to come alone." Marcus hesitated. "Sir, are you sure that's wise? Victor's been vocal about his concerns regarding your recent—" "I don't care about his concerns. Set up the meeting, the warehouse in Red Hook, 9 o'clock. And Marcus, make sure it's private. No one else there, no interruptions, just me and Victor." The second call went to an old contact, someone Adrian hadn't spoken to in 3 years, but who owed him the kind of debt that never expired. James Chen answered on the third ring, his voice wary. "Adrian Cole, I was wondering when you'd collect." "I need information," Adrian said without preamble. "Everything you have on Victor Reyes, his operations, his financiers, his vulnerabilities. I need it in 3 hours, and I need it comprehensive." "That's a tall order. You owe me your life. This is how you pay it back." Silence. Then, 3 hours. I'll send it encrypted. The third call was harder. Adrian stood on a corner in Manhattan, watching the city move around him, and dialed a number he'd hoped never to use. It rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered, rough and amused. "Adrian Cole, heard you went soft. Became a family man." "Hello, Dominic." Adrian kept his voice neutral. Dominic Santoro was everything Adrian had been running from, violent, ambitious, utterly without conscience. They'd been allies once, back when Adrian was still climbing. Now Dominic controlled most of Jersey and was making moves on New York territory, Victor's territory specifically. "I heard you had some business with my associates." "Had. Past tense. Victor Reyes made it clear you weren't interested in negotiations." "Victor doesn't speak for me anymore." A pause. Adrian could almost hear Dominic's mind working, calculating angles. "That's so. Word on the street is you stepped back. Got other priorities." "I'm restructuring, delegating differently. and I'm calling to discuss opportunities that benefit us both. I'm listening. Not on the phone. Meet me tomorrow, noon at Russo's in Soho. Come alone. We'll talk about territorial arrangements that give you what you want and solve my problems simultaneously. What kind of problems? The kind that involve removing obstacles to mutually beneficial business relationships. Another pause. Then Dominic laughed, dark and knowing. You're going to move against Victor. That's bold, risky, potentially stupid. It's necessary. Are you interested or not? I'm interested. Russo's, noon, but Adrian? If this is some kind of setup, some play to consolidate your power by setting me against your own people, it's not. I'm getting out, Dominic, stepping back permanently, but I'm doing it on my terms, and that means clearing the board first. You help me, and you get the waterfront, all of it. We'll talk tomorrow. Adrian hung up and immediately hated himself. 3 years he'd been trying to distance himself from his empire, and here he was making deals with men like Dominic Santoro, playing the same games he'd promised Lena he'd left behind. But Victor had forced his hand by threatening Mila, had turned this into a choice between his daughter's safety and his conscience. It wasn't really a choice at all. The information from James Chen arrived at 7, a comprehensive file detailing every aspect of Victor's operations. Adrian studied it at his penthouse, drinking coffee instead of whiskey, noting the weak points and leverage opportunities. Victor had expanded aggressively in Adrian's absence, taking on debt to finance growth, making promises to suppliers he couldn't quite keep. His empire looked strong on the surface but was actually fragile, over-leveraged, dependent on Adrian's continued backing. Pull that backing and Victor would crumble. Add pressure from someone like Dominic and he'd collapse completely. By 8:30, Adrian was in Red Hook, standing in the abandoned warehouse that served as neutral ground for sensitive meetings. The space was cavernous and cold, lit by a few bare bulbs that cast harsh shadows. He'd chosen it deliberately, isolated, private, the kind of place where conversations could happen without witnesses. Victor arrived exactly on time, flanked by 2 men despite instructions to come alone. Thomas Kane, the enforcer who'd approached Lena, and another muscle named Rodriguez. Victor himself was in his 50s, gray-haired and lean, with the kind of quiet menace that came from decades of violence. Adrian, Victor's voice echoed in the empty space. You wanted to talk, so talk. I said come alone. And I decided that was a stupid idea. We both know you're unpredictable these days, distracted, so I brought insurance. Victor spread his hands. Now what's so urgent it couldn't wait? Adrian met his eyes directly. Thomas Kane approached my ex-wife yesterday, delivered a message about protecting family. Did he? Victor didn't even try to deny it. Can't control what my men do on their own time. We both know that's bullshit. You sent him. You wanted to remind me what's at stake if I continue stepping back from operations. Someone had to. You've been AWOL for 6 weeks, Adrian. Missing meetings, ignoring calls, letting our organization drift while you play house in Brooklyn. People are noticing. Rivals are circling. And I'm supposed to just accept that you're too busy being a daddy to protect what we built? The contempt in Victor's voice made Adrian's hands clench. What we built is mine. I brought you into this organization. I gave you territory and authority, and I can take it all back. Can you? Victor stepped closer, his men flanking him. Because from where I stand, you've gone soft, lost your edge. And in our world, soft men don't keep power. They lose it, usually violently. Is that a threat? It's a statement of fact. You want to step back, be a father, live a normal life? Fine. Beautiful. Noble, even. But you don't get to do that and keep your empire. You have to choose. And if you choose the kid, you better be ready to walk away from everything else, including the protection that power provides. There it was. The ultimatum Victor had been building toward. Choose the empire and maintain the fear that kept threats at bay, or choose Mila and become vulnerable, targetable, a man with obvious weakness that enemies could exploit. Except Victor had miscalculated in one crucial way. He thought Adrian still cared about the empire enough to choose it over everything else. Thought the threat to Mila would bring Adrian back into line, make him recommit to the business of violence and control. But Adrian had already made his choice. had made it the moment he saw Mila on the swing in the park, had confirmed it every Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday since. The empire was just infrastructure now, useful but not sacred, and infrastructure could be demolished when it no longer served its purpose. "You're right," Adrian said calmly. "I can't have both. So I'm choosing Mila. I'm choosing to be her father, which means I need to make sure my past doesn't contaminate her future." Noble speech. But Adrian, you can't just walk away. You know too much. You're too connected. The moment you're not protected by power, you become a liability, and liabilities get resolved permanently. Unless I resolve them first. The words hung in the cold air. Victor's expression shifted, understanding dawning. "You're making a move. Against me. That's what this is. Against the whole structure. I'm dismantling my organization, Victor, selling off territories, transferring operations, getting out completely, and you're not going to stop me." Victor laughed, harsh and disbelieving. "You think I'll just let you walk away? Let you tear down everything we built because you knocked up some woman and discovered paternal feelings? I think you don't have a choice." Adrian pulled out his phone, pulling up James Chen's file. "You're overextended, took on $7 million in debt to finance expansion, made promises to the Italians in Jersey about controlling the waterfront, promises you can't keep without my backing. And you've been skimming from the organization for the past 8 months, moving money into personal accounts, buying real estate under shell companies, building your own safety net because you knew I was pulling back." Victor's face hardened. "You've been investigating me. I've been protecting myself. And what I found is that you're vulnerable, exposed. One conversation with your creditors, one meeting with Dominic Santoro, and your entire operation collapses. You lose the territory, lose the income, and probably lose your life when the people you owe come collecting." "You wouldn't." "I would. I am. I have a meeting with Dominic tomorrow where I'm handing him the waterfront, all of it. Your primary revenue stream, gone. And then I'm calling the Italians, telling them you've been playing both sides, using their money for unauthorized expansion. You'll be lucky if they just cut you off. More likely, they'll make an example." Thomas Kane's hand moved toward his jacket, but Victor raised a hand, stopping him. "You're bluffing. You need me. Need the organization. You try to dismantle everything, and you'll have a dozen rivals coming for you. Let them. I'm out, Victor. Completely out. I'm transferring my legitimate businesses to holding companies, selling off the rest, and retiring. By this time next month, I'll be just another civilian. No territory, no operations, no reason for anyone to come after me. Except revenge. You don't think I'll come for you? For your kid?" Adrian's voice dropped to something cold and final. "If you or anyone working for you comes within 100 yards of my daughter, I will destroy you. Not professionally, personally. I will use every resource I have, every connection, every piece of leverage, and I will erase you from existence. That's not a threat, Victor. That's a promise." The two men stared at each other across the warehouse space, years of alliance curdling into opposition. Victor's hand twitched, and Adrian knew he was considering it, ordering Kane to pull a weapon, resolving this the old-fashioned way, eliminating the problem before it metastasized. But Adrian had been preparing for this, had positioned himself near the exit, had his own weapon easily accessible, had made sure people knew where he was and who he was meeting. Victor might be willing to kill him, but not here, not now, not with so many complications. "You're making a mistake," Victor said finally. "Walking away doesn't keep you safe. It makes you a target." "Maybe, but it also means I have nothing left to protect except my daughter, which makes me exponentially more dangerous than when I had an empire to worry about. You want to test that theory? Go ahead. But understand that the man you knew, the one who built this organization through calculated risks and strategic violence, he's gone. What's left is a father willing to burn down the world to protect his child. And that's a much scarier thing." Adrian turned and walked toward the exit, his back deliberately exposed, trusting that Victor's survival instincts would override his pride. He made it to the door before Victor spoke again. "You'll regret this. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but eventually you'll regret choosing her over power." Adrian looked back over his shoulder. "The only thing I regret is not making this choice 4 years ago. Good night, Victor. Stay away from my family." He walked out into the February night, his heart pounding with adrenaline and fear, and something that might have been freedom. Behind him, The warehouse represented everything he was walking away from: the power, the fear, the empire built on violence and control. Ahead of him, somewhere in Brooklyn, his daughter slept peacefully, dreaming of jellyfish and dragons, blissfully unaware that her father had just declared war on his own past. The meeting with Dominic Santoro the next day was brief and businesslike. Adrian laid out the terms: the waterfront territory, the port operations, all of Victor's primary revenue streams transferred to Dominic in exchange for one simple guarantee: that Dominic would move aggressively against Victor, force him out completely, and ensure no one from the old organization ever approached Adrian or his family again. Dominic agreed immediately. He'd been looking for an opening into Manhattan, and Adrian was handing it to him gift-wrapped. The fact that it destroyed Victor in the process was just a bonus. "You really getting out?" Dominic asked as they stood to leave. "Completely?" "Completely. Never thought I'd see it. Adrian Cole, the man who built an empire from nothing, walking away to change diapers and attend PTA meetings. She's 3. No diapers anymore. And it's preschool, not PTA." Dominic laughed. "Semantics. But Adrian, you know what they say. You can leave the life, but the life doesn't leave you. Someone will always remember what you were, what you did. Then I'll deal with it when it happens. But I'm done being that man proactively, done building power for its own sake, done prioritizing empire over everything else." "Must be some kid." "She is." Adrian allowed himself a small smile. "She really is." The next 48 hours passed in controlled chaos. Adrian met with lawyers, accountants, and business managers, initiating the process of dismantling his criminal empire and legitimizing what could be legitimized. He sold off properties, transferred operations, and began the complicated work of extracting himself from a world he'd inhabited for 15 years. The calls came as expected, associates demanding explanations, rivals sensing opportunity, former allies expressing concern or contempt in equal measure. Adrian handled each conversation with finality, making it clear he was out, done, finished. Some accepted it. Others threatened, but Adrian had already made his peace with the risks, had already decided that whatever came next was worth it for Tuesday afternoons with Mila. Monday morning arrived cold and bright. Adrian dressed carefully, not in his business suits, but in the casual clothes that had become his uniform for visits with his daughter. He was on his way to Lena's apartment, ready to report that the threat was handled, when his phone rang. "Marcus," his voice tight with urgency. "Sir, we have a situation. Victor called an emergency meeting of the territory managers. He's making a play trying to vote you out. Consolidate control while you're distracted." "Let him." Adrian kept walking. "I'm out anyway. It doesn't matter." "Sir, you don't understand. He's telling people you've lost your mind, that you're a security risk because of your connection to a civilian woman and child. He's suggesting—" Marcus paused. "He's suggesting you need to be permanently removed before you compromise the organization." Adrian stopped walking. "He's putting a contract out." "Not yet. But he's building consensus. And sir, some of the managers are listening. They're scared of what happens if you really walk away, if the power structure collapses. They'd rather eliminate you and maintain stability than risk the chaos of transition." Adrian's mind raced. He'd expected Victor to resist, to fight back. But a contract, an actual hit put out by his own organization, that was escalation beyond calculation. That was Victor deciding that if he couldn't control Adrian, he'd remove him entirely. "Where's the meeting?" "The club in Midtown, 2 hours." "Cancel my other plans. I'm going." "Sir, is that wise? If Victor's building consensus against you, then I need to break that consensus before it solidifies. 2 hours, Marcus, make sure I'm on the agenda." Adrian hung up and immediately called Lena. She answered on the second ring, tension in her voice. "You said you'd fix this by Monday." "I'm fixing it, but there's been a complication. I need to handle one more meeting, and then it's done. I promise." "Adrian, I know what I promised, and I'm keeping it. But Lena, this is the last piece, the final move. After this, I'm out completely, and no one from my world will ever threaten you or Mila again." Silence. Then, "What time will you be done?" "By tonight. Can I come by? Explain everything?" "If you're alive to explain it." The words were meant as dark humor, but they landed with weight. Adrian swallowed hard. I'll be alive. I'll be there. 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock, Lena agreed. But Adrian, if something happens, nothing's going to happen. I promise. He hung up before she could argue and stood there on the Manhattan sidewalk, caught between two worlds. Behind him, his daughter's life, the ordinary, beautiful existence he'd been building with Mila. Ahead, the final confrontation with the empire he'd created and the men who thought they could use his love against him. Victor had made one fatal miscalculation. He'd assumed Adrian's attachment to Mila made him weak, gave him something to lose, created vulnerability that could be exploited. But Victor had it backward. Adrian had been weak when he had nothing to lose, when power and money were just abstractions, numbers in accounts and territory on maps. Now he had something real, something worth protecting at any cost, and that made him the most dangerous version of himself he'd ever been. The club in Midtown was one of Adrian's, a legitimate front that did actual business while serving as a meeting space for less legitimate operations. He arrived early, walking through the main floor where early afternoon customers were just starting to filter in, and headed to the private rooms upstairs. The territory managers were already gathering. 12 men who controlled operations from Boston to Baltimore, each of them powerful in their own right, each of them accustomed to Adrian's leadership. Victor stood at the head of the table, playing host, and the smile he gave Adrian was pure contempt. Adrian, so glad you could make it. We were just discussing organizational stability. I'm sure you were. Adrian took his seat at the opposite end of the table, meeting each man's eyes in turn, reading the room. Some looked uncomfortable, unwilling participants in whatever play Victor was orchestrating. Others looked calculating, already thinking about how to profit from leadership transition. A few looked openly hostile, having bought whatever story Victor was selling about Adrian's unfitness. Gentlemen, Victor began, we all know why we're here. Adrian has been increasingly absent from operations, distracted by personal matters, and while we all understand the appeal of family life, we also understand that leadership requires focus, dedication, the ability to put the organization first. I've been restructuring my involvement, Adrian said calmly, delegating operational control while maintaining strategic oversight. That's not absence. That's evolution. Evolution, Victor's smile widened. Interesting word. Others might call it abandonment. You've missed 7 major meetings in the past 6 weeks. You've ignored territory disputes that required immediate attention. You've made it clear that your priorities lie elsewhere. My priorities have expanded, Adrian corrected, but I've never abandoned the organization. Haven't you? Victor pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. According to my information, you've initiated sale of multiple properties. You've been meeting with lawyers about corporate restructuring. You've been liquidating assets and transferring operations. That's not expansion, Adrian. That's exit strategy. The folder made its way around the table, and Adrian watched the men's expressions shift as they reviewed the evidence. Victor had done his homework, compiled a comprehensive case for Adrian's withdrawal. It's true, Adrian said, deciding honesty was the only play left. I'm getting out. Completely out. I'm selling my interests, liquidating my holdings, and retiring from active participation in organizational leadership. The words landed like grenades. Men shifted in their seats, exchanged glances, recalculated loyalties in real time. You see? Victor's voice rose triumphantly. He admits it. He's abandoning the organization he built, leaving us vulnerable to rivals, putting every operation at risk because he's decided to play father to some bastard kid in Brooklyn. The words, bastard kid, ignited something dark and final in Adrian's chest. He stood slowly, his hands flat on the table, his voice dropping to something cold and absolute. Say whatever you want about me, Victor. Question my leadership, doubt my commitment, argue that I'm making poor strategic choices, but you will never, never speak about my daughter that way again. Victor laughed, harsh and mocking. Or what? You'll defend her honor? Adrian, you can barely defend yourself right now. You're outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and about to be outvoted. Face it, you chose wrong. And in our world, wrong choices have consequences. Adrian looked around the table again, reading the room with the instincts that had built his empire. Half the men were with Victor, either convinced by his arguments or opportunistic enough to back the winning side. A quarter were undecided, waiting to see how power would shake out. And the remaining quarter looked uncomfortable but unwilling to oppose the emerging consensus. He was going to lose the vote. Victor had the numbers. But Adrian had something better than numbers. He had truth, and he had nothing left to lose. "You're right," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. I chose my daughter over this, over all of you, over the empire I built and the power I accumulated. And you know what? It was the easiest choice I ever made." He walked slowly around the table as he spoke, commanding attention through presence rather than volume. "For 15 years I built this organization. I took risks while you played it safe. I made the hard calls while you followed orders. I created the structure that made all of you rich and powerful. And yes, for the past 6 weeks I've been stepping back, because I discovered something more important than any of this." Adrian stopped behind his chair, hands gripping the leather. "I have a 3-year-old daughter. Her name is Mila. She likes dragons and dinosaurs and jellyfish. She's brave and kind and curious and perfect. And she deserves a father who's present, who shows up, who doesn't disappear into this world of violence and fear and constant calculation. So yes, Victor, I'm getting out. Not because I'm weak, but because I'm finally strong enough to want something better." "Touching," Victor sneered, "but irrelevant. You don't get to just walk away because you had an attack of conscience. You built this world. You're responsible for it, and you'll stay in it one way or another. Is that a threat? It's reality. You know too much. You're too connected. The moment you're no longer protected by position, you become a liability, and we all know how liabilities are handled." There it was. The contract spoken aloud. Victor wasn't just trying to remove Adrian from leadership. He was building justification for elimination. And from the looks on several faces around the table, he had support. Adrian had one card left to play, one final move that would either save his life or ensure Mila grew up without a father. "Before you vote on Victor's proposal," he said quietly, "you should know that I've already transferred the waterfront operations to Dominic Santoro. As of noon yesterday, Victor's primary territory no longer belongs to this organization." The room exploded into chaos. Men shouting questions, demanding explanations, turning on each other in confusion and anger. Victor's face went white, then red, his hands slamming down on the table. "You did what?" "I made a deal. Dominic gets the ports, the shipping operations, everything Victor's been controlling. In exchange, he moves against anyone who threatens my family, including, especially, people from this organization." "You betrayed us." Victor's voice shook with rage. "You handed our territory to our biggest rival. I handed your territory to a man who'll use it better. The rest of the organization remains intact, but Victor's operations, the ones he's been building his power on, those are gone. Which means you're voting on whether to follow a man who just lost his primary revenue stream and made an enemy of Dominic Santoro. Good luck with that." The power dynamics in the room shifted instantly. Men who'd been backing Victor suddenly reconsidered. Territory managers who controlled other regions realized they weren't affected by Adrian's move. The undecided majority saw opportunity in Victor's weakness. Victor saw it too, saw his consensus crumbling, his play falling apart. And Adrian saw the exact moment when Victor decided that if he couldn't win politically, he'd win violently. Victor's hand moved toward his jacket, and Adrian knew what was coming, had known it would come to this eventually, had prepared for it with the cold calculation that had built his empire in the first place. "Don't," Adrian said quietly. "You pull that weapon and you're dead before it clears leather. You threaten me in front of these witnesses, and you've just given them all reason to side against you. You've already lost, Victor. Accept it with whatever dignity you have left." Victor's hand froze, caught between pride and survival. The room held its breath. 12 territory managers watching two men who'd built an empire together, now tearing it apart. Finally, slowly, Victor's hand moved away from his jacket. He straightened, his face a mask of fury and defeat. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes," Adrian replied. "It is. I'm out. You're finished, and the organization continues without either of us. Gentlemen," he addressed the room, "I'm formally resigning all positions, transferring my voting shares to be distributed among existing territory managers. I'll complete the legal paperwork by end of week. Who leads going forward is your decision, but I'm done. He walked toward the door, his back straight, refusing to show fear even though he knew he was more vulnerable in this moment than he'd ever been. One bullet, one knife, one man deciding to solve problems the old-fashioned way, and Mila would grow up without the father who'd finally learned to choose her. But he made it to the door, made it out into the hallway, made it down the stairs and out into the cold afternoon air. And only then did he allow himself to breathe, to feel the fear he'd been suppressing, to understand how close he'd come to dying in that room. His phone showed 6:15. He had 45 minutes to get to Brooklyn, to explain to Lena that it was over, that the threat was handled, that their daughter was safe. He started walking, then running, his breath clouding in the February air, racing toward the life he'd chosen over everything else. Adrian arrived at Lana's building at 7:03, his chest heaving from the sprint up 3 flights of stairs, his hands shaking with adrenaline that hadn't fully subsided. He knocked, trying to steady his breathing, trying to look like a man who had everything under control rather than someone who'd just walked away from his entire life. Lena opened the door with eyes that had been watching the clock. She took one look at his face and stepped aside without a word, letting him into the warm apartment that smelled like dinner and safety and everything his penthouse had never been. "Is she asleep?" Adrian asked, his voice rough. "Not yet. She wanted to wait up for you." Lena closed the door and leaned against it, arms crossed. "You look like hell." "I feel like hell, but it's done. It's over." "Tell me." So Adrian told her. Not everything. She didn't need to know about Victor's threats or how close he'd come to violence in that conference room. But enough. About dismantling his organization, about the deal with Dominic Santoro, about walking away from 15 years of building power because none of it mattered compared to Tuesday afternoons at the aquarium. Lena listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from skepticism to cautious belief. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You really did it," she said finally. "You actually walked away. I told you I would." "People say a lot of things, Adrian. You used to say a lot of things. Promises about changing, about prioritizing us, about being different, and then you'd choose the next deal, the next meeting, the next step toward building your empire. So forgive me for being surprised that this time you meant it." The words stung because they were true. Adrian had broken so many promises to Lena over the years that her doubt was earned, justified, practically required. He couldn't argue with her skepticism, could only prove through sustained action that something fundamental had shifted. "I understand," he said quietly. "And I know actions matter more than words. So I'm not asking you to believe me now. I'm just asking for the chance to keep proving it, every Tuesday, every Thursday, every Saturday, until you see that this isn't temporary insanity or guilt-driven compensation. This is who I choose to be now." "Daddy!" Mila's voice called from her bedroom. "Is that you?" Adrian's expression softened immediately, all the tension draining from his shoulders at the sound of his daughter's voice. "Yeah, sweetheart, it's me." Small feet pattered down the hallway, and then Mila appeared in her pajamas, purple ones covered in stars, with Smokey the dragon under one arm and Rocky the triceratops under the other. Her dark hair was damp from a bath, her face scrubbed clean and shining. "You're late," she informed him seriously. "You said 7. "I know. I'm sorry. I got held up with work. It won't happen again." Mila considered this, her young face thoughtful. Then she held out Smokey. "Smokey says it's okay if you read an extra story to make up for being late." Adrian knelt down to her level, taking the offered dragon. "Smokey's very wise. What story does he want to hear?" "The one about the brave knight. You have to do all the voices." They settled onto the couch, Mila between Adrian and Lena, her small body warm and solid and real. Adrian read about knights and dragons and princesses who saved themselves, doing different voices for each character while Mila corrected his dragon impression and giggled at his attempt at a princess voice. Halfway through the 3rd story, Mila's eyes started drooping. She fought sleep with the same determination she brought to everything else. But eventually her head tilted against Adrian's arm, her breathing deepening into the soft rhythm of childhood dreams. "I should put her to bed," Lena whispered, starting to rise. "Can I?" Adrian heard the plea in his own voice. "Please. I want to." Lena studied his face, seeing something that made her nod. Her room is the second door. You remember the routine? Tell me. Tuck her in, make sure Smokey and Rocky are within reach, turn on her nightlight, the star-shaped one on the dresser, and kiss her forehead. She always says she doesn't need it, but she does. Adrian carefully lifted Mila, cradling her against his chest as he carried her down the hallway. She stirred slightly, mumbling something about dragons, then settled back into sleep. Her room was exactly as he remembered from his first visit. Purple walls, books everywhere, drawings taped up with proud abandon. The physical manifestation of a childhood he'd missed most of. He laid her gently in her race car bed, pulling the covers up and tucking them around her small frame. Smokey and Rocky went on either side of her pillow, guardians against nightmares. The star nightlight cast soft patterns across the ceiling when he turned it on. Constellations for a little girl who deserved the universe. Adrian stood there for a moment, just watching her sleep, her dark eyelashes against her cheeks, the rise and fall of her breathing, the complete trust and innocence in her relaxed features. This was his daughter, this small, perfect human being who had his eyes and his stubbornness and absolutely none of his damage. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood. I love you, he whispered, the words feeling both natural and terrifying. I'm going to be here, I promise. For every story, every tantrum, every scraped knee and bad dream and perfect moment. I'm choosing you, Mila. Every single day, I'm choosing you. She didn't wake, didn't hear the vow, but Adrian felt the weight of it settle over him like armor, like purpose, like the most important commitment he'd ever make. When he returned to the living room, Lena had made tea. She handed him a cup and sat in the armchair, leaving the couch to him, maintaining physical distance even as the emotional walls between them showed hairline cracks. She adores you, Lena said quietly. Talks about you constantly. Daddy said this, Daddy did that, Daddy's going to take me here. It's sweet and terrifying simultaneously. Terrifying? Because what happens when you disappoint her? When the reality of sustained fatherhood becomes boring or inconvenient? When she's not a novelty anymore, but just a responsibility that interferes with whatever else you decide is important? Adrian set down his tea, meeting Lena's eyes directly. I won't disappoint her. You can't promise that. Nobody can. Every parent disappoints their kids sometimes. It's inevitable. Then I'll disappoint her in normal ways, by being overprotective or embarrassing or not understanding whatever she's into when she's a teenager. But I won't disappoint her by abandoning her, by choosing something else over her, by making her wonder if I actually love her, or if she's just an obligation I'm fulfilling out of guilt. Lena pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. I want to believe you, Adrian. I really do. But I've been here before. Sitting across from you while you make promises about changing, about being different, about prioritizing what matters. And every time, eventually, the Empire called louder. The next deal was too important. The next meeting couldn't be rescheduled. Until I wasn't even heard anymore, just resigned, expecting disappointment because that's what you delivered. I know. Adrian's voice was rough with regret. I know I trained you to expect the worst from me, and I can't undo that with words. But Lena, the Empire doesn't exist anymore. I dismantled it, walked away from 15 years of building power because none of it was worth losing Mila. There's nothing left to pull me away from her. There's always something, a new opportunity, a new ambition, a new version of the same drive that consumed you before. Adrian, I don't think you're lying to me. I think you genuinely believe you've changed. But I also think you're fundamentally the same man who couldn't sit still, who always needed the next challenge, who found routine and domesticity suffocating. The assessment was painful in its accuracy. Adrian had always been restless, always chasing something just beyond reach. Satisfaction had never come from what he had, but from what he was building toward. And Lena was right to question whether fatherhood, with its endless repetition and mundane moments, could hold his attention long term. Maybe you're right, he admitted. Maybe I'll always be restless, always looking for the next challenge. But Lena, raising Mila, being her father, that's the biggest challenge I've ever faced. Learning patience when I have none. Learning to be present when my instinct is to plan ahead. Learning to find meaning in the ordinary moments that make up a life. That's harder than building an empire ever was. And it matters more. Lena was quiet, absorbing this. Outside, the Brooklyn night hummed with distant traffic and neighborhood sounds. Inside, the apartment held its breath, waiting for whatever came next. I need you to understand something, Lena said finally. This isn't about us. You and me, that's done. We're not getting back together. We're not rebuilding a romance. We're not picking up where we left off 4 years ago. That ship sailed, burned, and sank. You made sure of that. The words hurt, but Adrian nodded. I understand. This is only about you and Mila, about you learning to be her father, about you proving you can show up consistently, reliably, without me having to chase you or remind you or wonder if this is the week you disappear. Can you accept that? Can you be in her life without expectations about my life? Yes. Adrian meant it. Whatever he'd once had with Lena was destroyed by his own choices, and he'd made peace with that loss. Or was trying to. What mattered now was Mila, and if being her father meant accepting that Lena would never forgive him romantically, that was a consequence he'd earned through sustained presence. Good. Lena uncurled from her chair, suddenly looking exhausted. Because, Adrian, I can't survive you breaking my heart again. Once was enough, but I will absolutely destroy you if you break Mila's. She's everything to me. The best thing that ever came from our marriage. And if you hurt her, I won't. You better not, because I meant what I said before. One slip, one broken promise, one time you choose something else over her, and we're done. I'll take her somewhere you'll never find us, and you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what she looks like, what she's doing, whether she remembers you. The threat was delivered calmly, matter-of-factly, which made it more terrifying than any rage would have been. Lena meant every word, and Adrian believed her completely. She'd already survived losing him once. She'd do whatever necessary to protect Mila from the same loss. I understand, Adrian said. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. 3 days a week, every week, no exceptions. And if something genuinely unavoidable comes up, I call ahead with honesty and a plan to make it up to her. That's the deal. Can you live with it? I can live with it. Can you live with me being part of her life, part of your life, by extension? Lena considered this, her fingers tracing patterns on her teacup. I don't know yet. Right now it's working. You're trying. She's happy, and I'm cautiously optimistic. Ask me again in 6 months when the novelty's worn off, and we're deep in the boring routine of co-parenting. Ask me when you've had to deal with tantrums and defiance and all the unglamorous parts of raising a 3-year-old. Then we'll see if you're still committed. It was fair. More than fair, actually. It was grace Adrian didn't deserve but desperately needed. He stood, recognizing that he'd stayed as long as appropriate, that pushing for more would undermine the fragile trust they were building. Thank you, he said, for tonight, for letting me put her to bed, for giving me this chance. Lena walked him to the door, her hand on the knob. Adrian, one more thing. Yeah? Whatever you did today, walking away from your organization, making deals with dangerous people, putting yourself at risk, don't do it again. Don't play hero trying to protect us from threats you created in the first place. If there are consequences to your past, we'll deal with them together. But I need you alive and present more than I need you making grand gestures that might get you killed. The threats handled. Victor's finished, Dominic's contained, and I'm out completely. No more danger, no more complications from my past. I hope you're right. But her eyes said she'd heard this before, had believed promises about clean breaks and fresh starts that never quite materialized. Tuesday at 3. Don't be late. I won't be. Adrian walked down the stairs and out into the February night feeling lighter than he had in years. The empire was gone. The power was dismantled. All that remained was the simple commitment to show up for his daughter, to be present and patient and everything he'd never been before. It should have felt like loss, should have felt like defeat, like walking away from everything he'd built. But instead, it felt like freedom, like putting down weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm. Tuesday afternoons became Adrian's sacred time, picking Mila up from preschool, stopping for hot chocolate at the cafe she loved, going to the park or the library or wherever her curiosity led. Thursday evenings meant dinner at Lena's apartment, helping with bath time, reading stories until Mila's eyes drooped. Saturday mornings were adventures, museums and aquariums and the zoo, building memories to replace all the ones he'd missed. Adrian learned the architecture of fatherhood through trial and error, learned that Mila had strong opinions about everything from which cup she wanted to whether crusts were edible that day, learned that tantrums were storms that passed if you just stayed steady and present, learned that the greatest joy came not from grand gestures but from small moments. Mila's hand in his, her laugh at his terrible jokes, the way she said, "I love you, Daddy," as naturally as breathing. He learned that routine wasn't suffocating, but grounding. That knowing what came next, story time, bedtime, the predictable pattern of their days together, created security for Mila and purpose for him. His restlessness didn't disappear, but it found new outlets. He started taking online courses in child development, volunteered at Mila's preschool, reading to groups of 3-year-olds who thought his dragon voice was hilarious, found challenges in the ordinary work of being present. His penthouse transformed gradually. The purple chair by the window became Mila's official spot, surrounded by books and toys and evidence of her visits. The sterile space filled with color and life, drawings taped to the refrigerator, a kid-sized table for art projects, a whole corner devoted to building blocks and stuffed animals. It wasn't a showpiece anymore. It was becoming a home. March arrived with false promises of spring. Adrian was at the park with Mila on a Saturday morning, pushing her on the swings while she shrieked with laughter and demanded, "Higher, Daddy, higher," when his phone rang. A number he didn't recognize, but the area code was local. He let it go to voicemail focused on Mila, but it rang again immediately, and again. "I need to take this, sweetheart," he said, slowing the swing. "1 minute, okay?" Mila nodded, already distracted by another child on the monkey bars. Adrian stepped away, answering with caution. "Hello? Adrian Cole?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional, controlled. "My name is Detective Sarah Martinez with the NYPD. I need to speak with you about Victor Reyes." Adrian's blood went cold. "What about him?" "He was found dead this morning, apparent suicide. But there are some irregularities we're investigating, and your name came up in his personal effects. I'd like to ask you some questions. Are you available to come to the precinct?" The world tilted. Victor was dead. Suicide, which in their world usually meant execution staged to look like suicide, which meant someone had decided Victor was too much of a liability to keep breathing. Dominic, probably, tying up loose ends. Or one of the other territory managers, consolidating power in the vacuum Adrian had created. "I'm with my daughter," Adrian said, his voice carefully neutral. "Can this wait until Monday?" "Monday's fine. But Mr. Cole, I should mention, we're talking to everyone who had business dealings with Mr. Reyes. This is routine inquiry. You're not a suspect. But if you had any information about his state of mind recently, any indication he might have been planning this..." "I hadn't spoken to him in weeks," Adrian lied smoothly. "We had a business relationship years ago, but I've been out of that world for a while now. I'm happy to answer questions Monday, but I don't think I'll have anything useful to tell you." "Monday morning, then. 10 o'clock at the 84th Precinct. Thank you for your cooperation." Adrian hung up and stood there, watching Mila play with another little girl, their laughter bright and innocent in the cold morning air. Victor was dead. The threat was eliminated permanently, but not by Adrian's hand. Someone else had decided to tie up that loose end. He should feel relieved, should feel safer knowing Victor couldn't come after him or his family. But instead, he felt the familiar weight of his past pressing down, reminding him that you didn't walk away from that world without leaving bodies behind, even if you didn't pull the trigger yourself. "Daddy," Mila called, "come play." Adrian shoved the phone in his pocket and went to his daughter, determined to give her the rest of their morning without the shadow of death hanging over it. But in the back of his mind, he was already planning, already thinking about what to tell the detective, how to navigate this final complication from a life he'd tried to leave behind. That evening, he told Lena about the call. They were in her kitchen after dinner, Mila playing in her room, and Adrian needed someone to know what was happening in case things went wrong. Lena's face went pale. "They think you were involved?" "They think I might have information. It's routine inquiry into a suspicious death of someone I had business connections with. I'll go talk to them Monday, answer their questions honestly, or as honestly as I can, and hopefully that'll be the end of it. And if it's not, then I deal with it. But Lena, I didn't kill Victor. Didn't order it, didn't arrange it, didn't have anything to do with it. My only involvement was walking away from the organization he was part of. If someone else decided he was a problem that needed solving, that's not on me. Legally, maybe. Morally? Lena's eyes were hard. You set things in motion, Adrian. You handed territory to Dominic Santoro knowing what kind of man he is. You created the conditions that led to Victor's death, even if you didn't pull the trigger. I know. Adrian's voice was quiet. I know I'm responsible, at least partially. But what was I supposed to do? Let Victor threaten you and Mila? Let him use you as leverage to keep me in line? I made the choice I had to make, the only choice I could live with. Lena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming on the counter. This is what I was afraid of, that your past would keep reaching forward, keep contaminating everything. That there'd always be one more complication, one more threat, one more piece of your old life refusing to stay buried. This is the last one. I promise. You can't promise that. You can't control what your past does. All those people you hurt, all those enemies you made, all those deals that went wrong, they don't disappear just because you decided to be a better man. They're still out there, still remembering, still potentially coming for you. Adrian wanted to argue, but he couldn't. She was right. He'd spent 15 years making enemies and burning bridges and doing things that left scars. Walking away didn't erase any of it, didn't make him clean or safe or truly free from consequences. Then I'll deal with whatever comes, he said finally. I'll handle it without putting you or Mila at risk. I'll do whatever I have to do to keep you safe. Don't make promises you can't keep. I'm not. I'm making a commitment. There's a difference. Monday morning arrived gray and threatening rain. Adrian dressed in one of his old suits, the armor of his previous life, and took the subway to the 84th precinct. The building was institutional and impersonal, exactly what he expected. Detective Martinez met him in a windowless interview room, her expression professionally neutral. She was in her 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of presence that came from years of dealing with people who lied for a living. Adrian recognized a formidable opponent when he saw one. Thank you for coming in, Mr. Cole, she gestured to a chair. As I mentioned on the phone, this is just routine inquiry. Victor Reyes died Friday morning, apparent suicide. But we're talking to people who knew him, building a picture of his state of mind. I'm happy to help however I can. How long did you know Mr. Reyes? About 12 years. We had business dealings in import-export and real estate development. And when did you last see him? Adrian had prepared for this, had his story straight. About 2 months ago, early February. We had a disagreement about business direction, and I decided to exit our shared ventures. We weren't on good terms when we parted. What kind of disagreement? I wanted to focus on legitimate business. Victor preferred a more aggressive, risk-tolerant approach. We couldn't reconcile our differences, so I sold my interests and walked away. Detective Martinez made notes, her expression giving nothing away. And you haven't spoken to him since? Not directly, no. But indirectly? Adrian hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I heard through mutual associates that he was unhappy with my decision to exit, that he felt I was abandoning ventures we'd built together, but we had no direct communication. Were you aware he was having financial difficulties? I'd heard rumors. Real estate's been volatile lately. A lot of developers are over-leveraged. Mr. Cole, I'm going to be direct with you. Detective Martinez set down her pen and looked at him directly. Victor Reyes was found in his office with a gunshot wound to the head, positioned to look like suicide, but our forensics team found some inconsistencies. Angle of entry, powder residue patterns, position of the body. Small things that suggest maybe it wasn't self-inflicted. Adrian's expression didn't change, but his mind raced. You're saying he was murdered. I'm saying we're investigating all possibilities. And in our investigation, we've discovered that several of Mr. Reyes's business associates have also died under suspicious circumstances in the past 2 months. Accidents, apparent suicides, one unsolved homicide, all of them connected to the same network of import-export and real estate ventures you just described exiting. I wasn't aware of that. Weren't you? Her eyes were sharp, assessing. Because from where we're sitting, it looks like someone's cleaning house, eliminating people connected to certain business operations. And you, Mr. Cole, walked away from those same operations right before the bodies started dropping. That's an interesting coincidence. Adrian met her gaze steadily. Detective, I understand how it might look, but I exited those business ventures because I wanted to focus on my family. I have a 3-year-old daughter I'm building a relationship with. That's my priority now, not real estate deals or import-export logistics. That's very noble, but it doesn't explain why everyone you used to work with is suddenly dying. Maybe they made enemies I didn't. Maybe their business practices caught up with them. I can't speak to what happened after I left. Detective Martinez leaned back in her chair, studying him. You know what I think, Mr. Cole? I think you're telling me a version of the truth. Maybe you didn't pull any triggers yourself. Maybe you really are trying to be a better man for your daughter. But I also think you know exactly what kind of businesses you were involved in, what kind of people Victor Reyes associated with. And I think you made some strategic moves before walking away, moves that set other people in motion. Adrian said nothing. Anything he said could only make things worse. Here's the thing, she continued. I can't prove you did anything illegal. Can't even prove you had knowledge of illegal activity. Your business filings are clean. Your corporate structures are legitimate. On paper, you're just a successful entrepreneur who decided to retire and focus on family. But Mr. Cole, if bodies keep dropping, if people connected to your old business ventures keep dying, I'm going to keep coming back to you, because coincidences only stretch so far. I understand. Bis. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're either the luckiest man in New York or you're very good at keeping your hands clean while other people get them dirty. Either way, I'll be watching. If your name comes up in connection with another death, another suspicious accident, another apparent suicide, we're going to have a much longer conversation, in a much less friendly setting. It was a warning, clear and direct. Adrian nodded acknowledgement. I appreciate your candor, Detective, and I promise you, I'm not involved in whatever's happening. I walked away from that world. I'm building a different life now. Then I hope for your daughter's sake that world lets you stay walked away. She stood, indicating the interview was over. Thank you for coming in. If you think of anything that might help our investigation, please call. Adrian left the precinct feeling the weight of his past pressing down harder than ever. Victor was dead, and the detective was right. It was probably Dominic Santoro cleaning house, eliminating potential threats and consolidating power. Adrian had set those events in motion by handing Dominic the territory and walking away. The blood on Dominic's hands might as well be on his, too. He took the subway back to Brooklyn, arriving at Lena's apartment earlier than planned. She opened the door with Mila on her hip, both of them surprised to see him. How did it go? Lena asked, setting Mila down. About as expected. They're investigating Victor's death as suspicious. The detective made it clear she thinks I'm connected, even if she can't prove it. But for now, I'm clear. For now. For now. Adrian knelt down to Mila's level, forcing a smile. Hey, sweetheart. Want to go to the park? Mila's face lit up. Yes. Can we feed the ducks? We can feed the ducks. Go get your coat. She ran off, leaving Adrian and Lena alone in the doorway. Lena's expression was troubled, her arms crossed protectively. This isn't over, is it? She said quietly. I don't know. Maybe. Maybe Detective Martinez was just letting me know she's watching, and as long as nothing else happens, she'll leave me alone. Or maybe this is the beginning of a much bigger problem. And if it is, if they come after you for your past, if you end up arrested, prosecuted, sent to prison, then I deal with it. But Lena, I swear to you, I will do everything in my power to keep you and Mila out of it. You're clean. You've always been clean. There's nothing connecting you to my old businesses. If worst comes to worst, you take Mila and you move on. You raise her. You give her the life she deserves. And you tell her that her father loved her but made mistakes he couldn't escape. Tears welled in Lena's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. I don't want to raise her alone again, Adrian. I don't want to explain to her why her father isn't there. I did that for 3 years already, and it was hard enough when I could tell myself you didn't know about her. If you disappear now, after she knows you, after she loves you, How do I explain that? You tell her the truth. That I made bad choices before I knew her, and I'm paying the price. That I loved her more than anything, but love doesn't erase consequences. That's not good enough. It's all I have. Mila returned with her coat, oblivious to the tension between the adults. Adrian stood, taking her small hand in his, and looked at Lena with everything he couldn't say. All the apologies and regrets and desperate hopes that somehow, impossibly, his past would stay buried long enough for him to build something good with his daughter. Lena nodded once, sharp and reluctant, giving permission for the park visit, even though her eyes said she was already preparing for the worst. Adrian walked out into the cold afternoon holding his daughter's hand, trying not to think about how many more times he'd get to do this before his past caught up with him completely. Trying not to count the remaining Tuesday afternoons and Thursday evenings and Saturday mornings before something shattered this fragile piece he'd built. At the park, Mila fed the ducks with bread they'd bought from the corner store, her laughter bright and clear as the birds crowded around her feet. Adrian watched her, memorizing every detail, banking moments against future loss. "Daddy," Mila said, looking up at him with those gray-blue eyes that were mirrors of his own. "Are you sad?" "No, sweetheart. I'm happy. Happy to be here with you." "Then why do you look sad?" "Because your father is haunted by the man he used to be. Because the world he left behind is catching up with him. Because he's terrified of losing you when he just found you." "Just thinking," Adrian said, forcing a smile, "about how lucky I am to have you." Mila considered this, then held out a piece of bread. "You can feed the ducks, too. It makes people happy." So Adrian fed the ducks, his daughter beside him, and tried to believe that the simple act of showing up, day after day, moment after moment, consistently and completely, would somehow be enough to outweigh all the darkness he'd accumulated in a life lived wrong. The ducks ate the bread, the afternoon stretched toward evening, and Mila's hand stayed warm in his. For now, that had to be enough. Whatever came next, whatever consequences his past demanded, he had this moment, this perfect ordinary afternoon in a Brooklyn park with his daughter, and he'd take whatever moments he could get. 3 months passed without incident. Spring arrived properly this time, transforming Brooklyn into something green and hopeful. The cherry blossoms bloomed in Prospect Park, and Adrian took Mila there every Saturday morning to run beneath the pink canopy while Lena watched from a bench with coffee and cautious optimism. Detective Martinez didn't call again. The investigation into Victor's death apparently stalled or moved in directions that didn't include Adrian. The bodies stopped dropping. The past seemed content to stay buried, at least for now. Adrian fell deeper into the rhythm of fatherhood. Tuesday afternoons became sacred. He scheduled nothing else, committed to nothing else, existed only for those hours with Mila. Thursday evenings meant dinner at Lena's apartment, the three of them developing an awkward but functional routine. Saturday mornings were adventures that grew more elaborate as spring warmed into early summer. He learned Mila's moods and preferences with the dedication he'd once brought to studying business rivals. Learned that she hated peas but loved broccoli, that purple was her favorite color but only certain shades, that she had nightmares about wolves but found comfort in her growing collection of stuffed dragons. He learned the weight of her hand in his, the sound of her laugh, the way her whole face lit up when she saw him waiting at preschool pickup. He also learned that Lena was slowly, incrementally, starting to trust him. Not romantically, that door remained firmly closed, but as Mila's father. She stopped hovering during his visits, started leaving them alone together for longer stretches. Even asked his opinion occasionally about parenting decisions, as if his input mattered, as if he'd earned a voice in their daughter's life. It should have been enough. This careful co-parenting arrangement, this measured involvement in Mila's world. But Adrian found himself wanting more. Not Lena back. He understood that was impossible, but something deeper with Mila, something that felt less like scheduled visitation and more like family. The realization came on a Saturday in late May. They were at Coney Island, Adrian, Lena, and Mila, walking the boardwalk after riding the carousel 3 times because Mila insisted each horse needed a turn. The day was perfect, warm and bright, with the ocean stretching endlessly blue beside them. Mila ran ahead, chasing seagulls with the fearless joy of childhood. Lena walked beside Adrian, ice cream melting down her hand, looking younger and happier than he'd seen her in years. She's growing up so fast, Lena said, watching their daughter. Sometimes I look at her and can't believe she's the same baby I brought home from the hospital, that tiny, serious infant who watched everything with your eyes. I missed so much of it. The regret in Adrian's voice was bottomless. First steps, first words, first everything. I can never get that back. No, Lena agreed. But you're here for everything that comes next. First day of kindergarten, first lost tooth, first heartbreak. All the moments that haven't happened yet, that has to count for something. It did count. Counted for everything, actually, but Adrian still felt the weight of those missing years, the ghost of the father he should have been haunting the father he was trying to become. Lena, he said carefully, I want to ask you something, and I need you to really consider it, not just dismiss it out of hand. She tensed slightly. What? I want more time with Mila, not instead of our current schedule, in addition to it. I want overnights, weekends at my place. I want her to have a room in my apartment that's actually hers, not just a corner with toys. I want to be more than the fun dad who shows up 3 times a week. Lena stopped walking, turning to face him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Adrian, I know it's a lot to ask. I know I haven't fully earned that level of trust yet, but Lena, I'm not going anywhere. This isn't temporary insanity or guilt-driven obligation. This is my life now. Mila is my life now. And I want to be a real father to her, not just a visitor in her world. You are a real father to her. 3 days a week, scheduled visitation. That's not the same as actually living it. I want bedtime routines and lazy Sunday mornings. I want to be there when she has nightmares, not just hear about them secondhand the next day. I want the boring parts and the hard parts and all the unglamorous reality of raising a child. Lena studied his face for a long moment while Mila's laughter carried on the ocean breeze. This is about more than just time with Mila, isn't it? What do you mean? You're trying to build something. Not just a relationship with your daughter, but a whole new identity. The man who left his empire behind and found redemption through fatherhood. The success story of transformation. And you need more access to Mila to make that story complete. The words stung because they held truth Adrian didn't want to examine too closely. Maybe that's part of it, he admitted. Maybe I am trying to prove something, to myself, to you, to whoever's keeping score of my attempts at being better. But does that make the wanting less real? Does it invalidate the fact that I love her and want to be present for her life? No. Lena's voice softened. But it means I have to be careful. Have to protect her from becoming a prop in your redemption arc. She's a person, Adrian. A complicated, growing, developing human being who needs consistency and stability, and parents who show up because they love her, not because she makes them feel like better people. She does make me feel like a better person, but that's not why I show up. I show up because Tuesday afternoon feels wrong without her. Because Thursday evening is incomplete until I see her face. Because Saturday mornings have meaning they never did before. I show up because not showing up is unthinkable. Mila ran back to them, holding a shell she'd found. Look, Daddy, it's shaped like a heart. Adrian knelt down, examining the shell with appropriate reverence. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Should we keep it? Yes. I'm going to put it in my treasure box with the special rocks and the feather from the park. She ran off again, and Adrian stood, finding Lena watching him with an expression that might have been the beginning of belief. One overnight, she said finally. Next Saturday. You pick her up Saturday morning, keep her until Sunday afternoon. We'll see how it goes. Relief and terror washed over Adrian simultaneously. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me if she comes home happy and well-rested and excited to do it again. But Adrian, if you're not ready for this, if you realize overnight that the reality of solo parenting is harder than you imagined, tell me. Don't fake it. Don't pretend everything's fine when you're overwhelmed. I'd rather know the truth than have you soldier through something you can't sustain. I can sustain it. We'll see. The week leading up to that first overnight, Adrian transformed his penthouse with manic energy. Mila's corner expanded into a full bedroom, painted purple at her insistence, with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling and shelves for her growing collection of books and dragons. He installed a nightlight shaped like a castle, bought sheets covered in dinosaurs, filled a toy chest with carefully selected items that would keep a 3-year-old entertained. He also panicked, called Lena 3 times with questions about routines and preferences and what to do if Mila woke up scared in the middle of the night. Googled first overnight with preschooler and read 17 articles about making the transition easier. Made lists of activities and backup activities and emergency backup activities in case everything else failed. "You're overthinking this," Lena said when he called for the 4th time. "Just be present, play with her, feed her reasonably healthy food, make sure she brushes her teeth. She's not expecting perfection, Adrian. She's 3. She's expecting you to show up and pay attention to her. That's it." Saturday morning arrived sunny and warm. Adrian was at Lena's apartment at 9, a full hour before the agreed pickup time, unable to sit still in his penthouse waiting. Mila answered the door, already dressed in her favorite purple dress, her small backpack stuffed with Smokey the Dragon and Rocky the Triceratops and apparently half her bedroom. "I'm ready," she announced. "I packed everything myself." Lena appeared behind her, holding a much smaller bag. This is what she actually needs. The backpack is just comfort items. And Adrian, she handed him a piece of paper. Her schedule, approximate meal times, when she usually naps, bedtime routine. You don't have to follow it exactly, but it helps to have structure. Adrian took the paper like it was a sacred text. "Got it. Structure, routine, pay attention. And call me if you need anything at all. I don't care what time it is." "We'll be fine," Adrian said, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Right, Mila? We're going to have the best adventure." Mila took his hand, bouncing with excitement. "Can we have pancakes for breakfast?" "We can have pancakes for every meal if you want." "Adrian," Lena's voice held warning. "Kidding. Mostly kidding. Pancakes for breakfast, something with vegetables for lunch, and we'll see about dinner." They said goodbye to Lena, who hugged Mila maybe 3 seconds longer than necessary, her eyes meeting Adrian's over their daughter's head with a look that said everything would be fine, but also if anything went wrong, she'd know exactly who to blame. The subway ride to Manhattan was an adventure in itself. Mila pressed her face against the window, narrating everything she saw, asking questions about where people were going and why the train went underground and whether dragons could ride the subway if they were very polite. Adrian answered every question, held her hand tighter when the train lurched, and felt something in his chest expand with each block they traveled together. His penthouse, her penthouse now, at least partially, greeted them with morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Mila's eyes went wide, taking in the view, the space, the purple bedroom that was all hers. "It's so high up!" She ran to the window, pressing her hands against the glass. "I can see everything. Daddy, look, there's a tiny car and tiny people, and everything's tiny from up here." Adrian joined her at the window, seeing his city through her eyes. Not territories to control or assets to manage, but a vast playground of possibility. Buildings reaching toward the sky like the towers in her storybooks. Streets winding like rivers through canyons of stone and steel. A world that existed not to be conquered, but to be explored. They made pancakes together. Or rather, Adrian made pancakes while Mila helped by adding chocolate chips in quantities that violated every nutrition guideline Lena had left. The kitchen ended up covered in batter and laughter, and Adrian discovered that cleaning syrup off a 3-year-old's face required patience and wet wipes, and accepting that some stickiness was just part of the experience. The day unfolded in perfect moments strung together. They went to Central Park and fed ducks and played on the playground until Mila was breathless and grass-stained. They had lunch at a cafe where Mila charmed the waiter into bringing her extra strawberries. They went to a bookstore, and Mila picked out 3 new stories about dragons and brave children and magical adventures. Back at the penthouse, Mila was starting to fade. Adrian suggested quiet time, and she curled up on the couch with Smokey while he read her new books, doing all the voices, getting better at the dragon impression that she'd been coaching him on for months. Halfway through the 3rd book, she fell asleep. Just slipped into dreams mid-sentence, her small body going heavy against his side. Adrian sat there holding her, afraid to move and wake her, content to just exist in this moment of complete peace. This was fatherhood. Not the grand gestures or expensive gifts or orchestrated adventures. This, holding your sleeping child while the afternoon stretched golden through the windows. Being trusted enough to be boring, to be routine, to be the steady presence in her world. He carried her to her new bedroom when his arm went numb, laying her gently in the dinosaur-sheeted bed. She stirred slightly, mumbling something about purple dragons, then settled back into sleep. Adrian stood there watching her breathe, overcome by the weight of responsibility and love and terror that something might happen to her, that he might fail her, that the universe might somehow take her away. She woke an hour later, disoriented at first, then delighted to remember she was at Daddy's house for a whole sleepover. They had dinner, chicken and vegetables that Mila picked at while negotiating for dessert. They took a bath, which turned into a 40-minute adventure involving every bath toy Adrian had purchased and a flooded bathroom floor. They read more stories, Mila, in her new pajamas, fresh and clean and smelling like the lavender soap Lena had packed. "Daddy?" Mila said as he tucked her in, making sure Smokey and Rocky were positioned just right. "Do you love Mommy?" The question caught Adrian completely off guard. He sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. "I love that your mommy gave me you, and I'm grateful to her for being such a good mother and giving me a chance to be your father. But do you love her like in the stories, like princes love princesses? Your mommy and I loved each other a long time ago, but sometimes grown-ups stop loving each other that way. It doesn't mean we don't care about each other. We both love you more than anything. That's what matters." Mila considered this, her young face serious in the nightlight's glow. "Jacob's parents got divorced. He has 2 houses now. Is that what we have?" "Sort of. You have Mommy's house in Brooklyn and my house here. And you're loved in both places. You're the luckiest girl in the world because you have 2 homes and so many people who love you. Will you always be here, in this house? I'll always be wherever you need me to be. Promise?" The word hung between them, weighted with every promise Adrian had ever broken, every commitment he'd failed to honor. But looking at his daughter's trusting face, he made the promise anyway, made it knowing the universe might have other plans, that Detective Martinez might come back, that his past might reach forward and destroy everything. Made it because she needed to hear it, and he needed to mean it. "I promise, Mila. I'll always be here for you." She smiled, satisfied, and closed her eyes. Adrian waited until her breathing deepened, then kissed her forehead and turned on the star-shaped nightlight. He left the door cracked open so he could hear if she called for him, then collapsed on his couch, feeling like he'd run a marathon. One day. He'd successfully parented Solo for 1 day. 23 hours down, a lifetime to go. His phone buzzed around 10. Lena texting, "How's it going?" Adrian replied, "She's asleep. We survived. Barely." The response came quickly. "Barely is good enough for the first overnight. Call me if you need anything." He didn't need anything except maybe a manual for how to be the father Mila deserved. But he texted back, "We're good. Thank you for trusting me with her." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, then, "You're her father, Adrian. It's not about trust anymore. It's about partnership. We're in this together, whether we like it or not." The words settled something in Adrian's chest. Partnership. Not romance, not reconciliation, but the practical alliance of 2 people committed to raising a child they both loved. It was less than he'd once had with Lena, but more than he deserved after everything he'd destroyed. He was dozing on the couch when the nightmares came. Mila's cry pierced the quiet apartment, high and frightened, and Adrian was moving before his brain fully engaged. He found her sitting up in bed, tears on her cheeks, reaching for comfort. "Hey, sweetheart, I'm here." He sat on the edge of her bed, and she immediately crawled into his lap, burying her face against his chest. "It's okay. It was just a bad dream." "There were wolves," she sobbed. "Big ones with teeth, and they were chasing me, and I couldn't run fast enough, but you're safe now. I'm here. No wolves can get you here, I promise. Can I sleep with you?" Everything Adrian had read said you shouldn't let kids sleep in your bed because it created bad habits and dependency. But his daughter was crying and scared and asking for comfort, and suddenly all the parenting advice in the world seemed less important than just being there. "Of course you can." He carried her to his bedroom, settled her in his bed with Smokey and Rocky, and lay down beside her. She curled against him, her small body finally relaxing, her breathing slowly returning to normal. "Daddy?" Her voice was sleepy. "I'm glad you're my dad." The words hit Adrian with force that knocked the air from his lungs. All the mistakes he'd made, all the years he'd missed, all the ways he'd failed before even knowing she existed. And still, she was glad he was her father. Still, she chose to love him with the uncomplicated generosity of childhood. "I'm glad I'm your dad, too," he managed, his voice rough. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me." She was asleep within minutes, her hand clutching his shirt. Adrian lay there in the darkness, feeling the weight and warmth of his daughter beside him, and thought about the empire he'd built and dismantled. All that power, all that money, all those years of accumulating control over people and territories and markets, and none of it had ever made him feel as rich as this moment did. Morning arrived too early. Mila woke up energized and demanding pancakes again, apparently having decided this was the official breakfast of Daddy's house. They made them together, the kitchen once again becoming a disaster zone of flour and chocolate chips and laughter. After breakfast, they went to the Museum of Natural History. Mila wanted to see the dinosaurs again, wanted to show her new stuffed dinosaur Rocky what his ancestors looked like. They spent 3 hours wandering through exhibits, Mila asking endless questions that Adrian answered with the help of interpretive placards and his phone. Lunch was pizza in the park, sitting on a bench while Mila fed crusts to pigeons, despite Adrian's protests about feeding wildlife. The afternoon was lazy and perfect, coloring at the penthouse, building block towers for the express purpose of knocking them down, reading stories until both of them were yawning. By the time they headed back to Brooklyn Sunday afternoon, Adrian was exhausted and happier than he could remember being in years. Mila chattered the whole subway ride about everything they'd done, everything she'd seen, everything she wanted to do next time. Next time. The words were casual from her mouth, but landed like promises in Adrian's heart. Lena met them at her apartment door, searching Mila's face for signs of distress or neglect. But Mila just launched into an enthusiastic recap of their adventures, dragging Lena by the hand to show her the new books and tell her about the chocolate chip pancakes and the wolves in the nightmare and how Daddy made them go away. "She okay?" Lena asked Adrian quietly while Mila was in her room putting Rocky back in his proper place. "She was great. We were great. It was—" Adrian paused, trying to find words for something too big for language. "It was everything I didn't know I needed." Lena's expression softened. "You look exhausted." I am. How do you do this every single day? You get used to it, the exhaustion becomes normal, and the joy makes it worth it." "It really does." Adrian looked at Lena directly. "Thank you for giving me this chance, for trusting me with her overnight, for everything you're doing to help me learn how to be her father." "You're doing the work, Adrian. I'm just—" She paused, choosing words. "I'm just trying to get out of your way and let you. Trying to accept that maybe you really have changed, that maybe you really can be the father she deserves. I'm trying. Every day I'm trying." "I know." And for the first time in 4 years, Lena smiled at him with something that looked almost like forgiveness. "I can see it." Mila emerged from her room and demanded that both her parents read bedtime stories together. So they did, squeezed onto Mila's small bed, taking turns with different character voices while their daughter giggled between them. It was domestic and ordinary and nothing like the life Adrian had imagined when he was building his empire. It was better. That night, back in his penthouse, Adrian stood at his window looking out over the city he'd once tried to own. The buildings glittered in the darkness, testament to countless lives being lived in countless ways. Somewhere in Brooklyn, his daughter was sleeping peacefully. Somewhere in that same apartment, his ex-wife was probably wondering if she'd made a mistake trusting him with overnight visits. But Adrian knew with a certainty that had nothing to do with calculation or strategy, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not in a penthouse bought with criminal proceeds, but in the life he was building moment by moment with Mila. His phone rang, shattering the quiet. Unknown number, but he answered anyway. "Mr. Cole?" Detective Martinez's voice was professional but not hostile. "I wanted to update you on the Victor Reyes investigation." Adrian's stomach tightened. "I'm listening." "We've closed the case, ruled it a suicide. Turns out Mr. Reyes was facing significant financial pressure, had made some enemies in his business dealings, and left a note we didn't find initially. The inconsistencies we flagged earlier had explanations. Sometimes a suicide is just a suicide. Relief flooded through Adrian. I appreciate you letting me know. I also wanted to tell you that we looked into the other deaths I mentioned, found connections that don't include you. Seems like Mr. Reyes was involved in some business ventures that created their own problems. You were smart to get out when you did. I got out for my daughter, not because I saw problems coming. Maybe. But either way, Mr. Cole, you're clear. Our investigation no longer has any interest in you. You're free to live your life. The words settled over Adrian like absolution he didn't quite deserve but desperately needed. Thank you, Detective. Set. Take care of that little girl. Based on what I've seen, she's the only reason you're not in handcuffs right now. Not because you did anything illegal we could prove, but because you walked away before you got in too deep. She saved you. Remember that. The call ended, leaving Adrian alone with his city view and the weight of truth. Mila had saved him. From a life that would have ended in prison or violence, or the kind of emptiness that came from having everything and valuing nothing. She'd given him a reason to want something better, to be something better, and he'd spend the rest of his life proving worthy of that gift. The months that followed established a new normal. Overnight visits became regular, every other weekend, then every weekend as Mila grew comfortable splitting time between two homes. Adrian learned the rhythms of solo parenting, the negotiations over vegetables, the bedtime battles, the sick days and tantrums, and all the unglamorous reality Lena had warned him about. He loved it, loved all of it. The hard parts and the easy parts, and everything in between. Loved being needed in that immediate, absolute way children need their parents. Loved watching Mila grow and change and become more fully herself. He also learned to co-parent with Lena in ways that transcended their broken marriage. They shared calendars and coordinated schedules. They discussed discipline approaches and education options. They attended Mila's preschool events together, sitting side by side with the careful distance of people who'd loved each other once and learned to build something different from the ruins. Summer arrived properly. Adrian reduced his remaining business commitments to almost nothing, living off investments and savings that would last decades if managed properly. His days revolved around Mila's schedule. His purpose came from being present in her life. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early July, sticky and hot, when Adrian picked Mila up from preschool and found her unusually quiet. They got ice cream as usual, but she just pushed it around with her spoon, not eating, not chattering like she normally did. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Adrian asked, kneeling down to her level on the park bench. "Jacob says I'm lucky I have two houses." Mila's voice was small. "But I'm not lucky. I'm sad because my parents don't love each other." The words pierced Adrian's heart. "Oh, Mila, Jacob's parents fight all the time. They yell and make his mom cry. And he says at least my parents are nice to each other even if they don't live together. But Daddy, I wish we could all live together, like a real family." Adrian pulled her into his lap, holding her tight. "We are a real family, sweetheart. Just because your mom and I live in different houses doesn't make us any less your family. We both love you so much. That's what makes us family. But you don't love each other. Your mom and I loved each other once. We made mistakes that meant we couldn't stay married, but the best thing we ever did was make you, and we'll always be connected through you. Always be on the same team when it comes to what's best for you." Mila was quiet, processing this. Then, "Do you wish you could marry Mommy again?" The question was loaded with impossible hope. Adrian thought about Lena, about the woman she'd been when they married and the stronger, wiser woman she'd become in the years since, about the companionship they were building as co-parents and whether it could ever transform into something more. "I wish I'd made better choices when we were married," Adrian said carefully. "I wish I'd chosen your mom and our family over my work. But I can't change the past, Mila. I can only try to be better now. And right now, your mom and I are good friends who work together to take care of you. That's what matters." Mila nodded, not entirely satisfied, but accepting the truth as children do. They finished their ice cream in comfortable silence, and Adrian thought about the life he'd destroyed and the one he was trying to build from its pieces. That evening, dropping Mila off at Lena's apartment, he lingered after their daughter ran to her room. Lena noticed, pausing in the doorway. "Everything okay?" "Mila asked today if I wished we could get married again." Lena's expression closed slightly. "What did you tell her?" The truth. That I wish I'd made better choices when we were married. That I can't change the past. That we're good co-parents now, and that's what matters. That's a good answer. Is it, though? Adrian met her eyes. Because, Lena, I've been thinking about what we have now and what we used to have and whether— Don't. Lena held up a hand. Don't go there, Adrian. We're doing well. We're building something functional and healthy for Mila. Don't complicate it with fantasies about reconciliation. Is it a fantasy? We spend every weekend together with her. We coordinate everything, communicate well, work as a team. We're building a partnership that works. A co-parenting partnership. That's all this is. All it can be. Why? Because I screwed up 4 years ago? Because I chose wrong and hurt you and destroyed what we had? I know I did all that, Lena, but I'm different now. We're different now. Maybe we could— No. Her voice was firm. Adrian, you're doing amazing with Mila. You're being the father I always hoped you could be. But that doesn't mean I'm going to risk my heart on you again. I survived our divorce, survived building a life alone with our daughter. I won't go through that again. You wouldn't have to. I'm not that man anymore. Aren't you? Lena's eyes were sad but certain. You walked away from your empire for Mila. That's beautiful and meaningful and exactly what she needed. But Adrian, you didn't walk away from me. You didn't even know I existed in your thinking until you saw us at that park. If circumstances were different, if you'd never learned about Mila, you'd still be out there building power and chasing the next deal. I wasn't enough to change you, only she was. The words hit Adrian with the force of absolute truth. Lena was right. He'd transformed himself for Mila, not for her. The woman he'd once loved hadn't been enough to make him want something different. Only his daughter had been. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for not changing for you, for not realizing what I had until it was too late. I know you are, and I've forgiven you, or I'm working on it. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It just means I'm not carrying anger anymore. We're good, Adrian. We're better than good. We're functioning co-parents who genuinely like each other and want the best for our daughter. That's more than a lot of divorced couples have. Let's not ruin it by trying to resurrect something that died for good reasons. Adrian wanted to argue, wanted to make the case that they could build something new from the ashes of their marriage. But looking at Lena's face, at the certainty there, the self-protection that came from hard-won wisdom, he understood that pushing would only damage what they'd built. Okay, he said. Okay, you're right. I'm grateful for what we have. I won't complicate it. Lena nodded, relief evident. Thank you. And Adrian? For what it's worth, I'm proud of you, of who you're becoming. Mila's lucky to have you as her father. The validation meant more than Adrian could express. He left the apartment feeling both disappointed and grateful. Disappointed that romantic reconciliation wasn't possible, but grateful that he had Lena's respect, her friendship, and her partnership in raising their daughter. It was enough. It had to be. Fall arrived with its annual promise of fresh starts. Mila started pre-K, nervous and excited in equal measure. Adrian took her to the first day, held her hand while she clung to his leg, then watched her bravely walk into the classroom when her teacher called. He stood outside the window like a dozen other parents, watching his daughter navigate this new world, ready to intervene but hoping he wouldn't have to. She was fine, better than fine. She made friends immediately, threw herself into activities with characteristic enthusiasm, and came home every day with stories and artwork and a vocabulary that seemed to expand hourly. Adrian attended every school event, every parent-teacher conference, every holiday program where Mila performed with varying degrees of success. He became a familiar face at the school, the dad who always showed up, who volunteered for field trips, who knew all the other kids' names and their parents' faces. It was at the Halloween party, Mila dressed as a purple dragon, naturally, that Adrian met Dr. Sarah Chen. She was another parent, there with her son David, who was in Mila's class. They started talking in the casual way parents do at school events, discovering they lived in the same neighborhood and often took their kids to the same park. "You're a single dad?" Sarah asked, watching Adrian fix Mila's dragon tail for the third time. "Divorced, co-parenting with Mila's mom. She's in Brooklyn, I'm in Manhattan. We split custody fairly evenly. That must be challenging." "It works. We make it work for Mila. That's what matters." Sarah smiled, warm and genuine. "That's refreshing. My ex-husband and I can barely be in the same room without arguing. It's nice to see divorced parents who actually function as a team. They exchanged numbers for potential playdates between Mila and David. Adrian thought nothing of it beyond the practical advantages of having parent friends. But over the following weeks, Sarah kept appearing in his life. At the park, at school pickup, at weekend events. Their kids played well together. They had coffee while supervising playground adventures. They discovered shared interests and easy conversation. It took Adrian embarrassingly long to realize Sarah was interested. That the casual conversations and frequent encounters weren't coincidental, but orchestrated. That the single mom with the kind smile and easy laugh was carefully, deliberately making herself available. "She likes you," Lena said when Adrian mentioned Sarah during one of their weekly coordination calls. "You should ask her out." "I'm not looking to date anyone." "Why not?" "Adrian, you're 42. You're not going to stay single forever just because our marriage failed. You're allowed to move on." "Have you moved on?" Lena hesitated. "I've been on a few dates. Nothing serious. But yes, I'm open to meeting someone. And you should be too." The conversation unsettled Adrian. He hadn't thought about dating, about relationships beyond his connection with Mila and his co-parenting partnership with Lena. But she was right. He was allowed to build a life that included more than just fatherhood. Still, he hesitated. Sarah was wonderful, kind, intelligent, with a son who got along great with Mila. She represented the kind of normal, healthy relationship Adrian had never managed to build. But starting something new felt like tempting fate, like risking the fragile stability he'd worked so hard to achieve. It was Mila, surprisingly, who pushed him forward. She'd been playing with David regularly, and one Saturday afternoon she asked if David's mom could come to dinner with them. "Why do you want Sarah to come to dinner?" Adrian asked carefully. "Because she's nice, and she makes you smile different." "Different how?" Mila scrunched up her face, thinking. "Like you smile at me because you love me. But you smile at Miss Sarah like the princes smile at princesses in stories, all soft and silly." Out of the mouths of children. Adrian realized his daughter had seen something he'd been denying to himself. That maybe he was interested in Sarah, even if he'd been avoiding acknowledging it. So he asked Sarah to dinner, just the two of them, adults only, at a quiet restaurant where they could talk without supervising children. She said yes with a smile that made Adrian's chest tighten in ways he'd forgotten were possible. The date was surprisingly easy. They talked about their kids, about co-parenting challenges, about careers and interests, and the lives they'd built. Sarah was a pediatric surgeon at Mount Sinai, brilliant and dedicated with a schedule that somehow accommodated David's needs and her demanding profession. She was divorced from David's father, who lived in California and visited quarterly, leaving Sarah as the primary parent. "It's hard sometimes," she admitted over dessert, "being the only one who shows up for everything, making all the decisions alone. I envy what you and Mila's mom have, that partnership, that shared commitment. It took work to get there, and a lot of mistakes on my part. Lena's more generous than I deserve. She must see something worth being generous about." Adrian thought about that, about the man he'd been, and the father he was becoming. "I hope so. I'm trying, at least, trying to be worth my daughter's trust. From what I've seen, you're succeeding." They started seeing each other regularly. Nothing rushed, nothing complicated. Dinner once a week. Coffee dates when their schedules aligned, coordinating play dates so Mila and David could spend time together. It was adult and healthy, and nothing like the intensity Adrian had experienced with Lena all those years ago. It was also nice. Surprisingly, wonderfully nice. "You're dating," Lena observed when Adrian dropped Mila off one Sunday evening. "The surgeon mom from school? Is it that obvious?" Mila won't stop talking about David's mom and how pretty she is and how she smells like flowers. So yes, obvious. Lena's expression was complicated. Genuine happiness mixed with something that might have been wistfulness. "That's good, Adrian. I'm glad you're moving forward." "Are you? Really?" "Really. You deserve to be happy. And from what Mila says, Sarah's good to you, good with Mila. That's what matters." They stood in Lena's doorway, former spouses navigating the strange territory of new relationships and co-parenting. Adrian wanted to ask if Lena was seeing anyone, but the question felt too personal, too weighted with history they'd agreed to leave behind. "Thank you," he said instead, "for being okay with this, for making it easy. We promised to put Mila first. That means supporting each other's happiness, even when it's complicated. Even when it—" She stopped, choosing different words. "Even when life moves in unexpected directions." Winter returned with its annual reminder that time kept moving forward. Mila turned 4 in January, celebrating with a party that included both her parents, Sarah and David, and a dozen preschool friends. Adrian watched his daughter blow out candles on a purple cake shaped like a dragon, and thought about the years that had passed since he'd first seen her at that park. He'd been so lost then, so empty despite his empire and his power. And now, watching Mila laugh surrounded by people who loved her, he felt rich in ways that had nothing to do with money. Sarah squeezed his hand under the table, and Adrian squeezed back. Across the room, Lena caught his eye and smiled, genuine, warm, approving. They'd built something functional and good from the wreckage of their marriage, had become true partners in raising the daughter they both adored. It wasn't the life Adrian had planned, wasn't the empire he'd built or the power he'd accumulated, but it was better. Infinitely, impossibly better. That night, after the party ended and Sarah went home, Adrian tucked Mila into bed with her new stuffed dragon, this one bright blue and named Thunder. She was exhausted and sugar-high, fighting sleep with determination. "Daddy?" she said as he turned on her nightlight. "This was the best birthday ever." "I'm glad, sweetheart. You deserve the best birthdays." "Will you be here for my next birthday? And the one after that? And all the birthdays forever?" Adrian sat on the edge of her bed, brushing dark hair from her forehead. "I'll be here for every birthday you'll let me attend. Even when you're a teenager and think I'm embarrassing. Even when you're grown up and have your own life. I'll always show up for you, Mila. Always." "Promise?" "I promise." She smiled, satisfied, and closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing deepened into the rhythm of childhood sleep. Adrian stayed a moment longer, watching his daughter dream, thinking about promises and redemption and the strange grace of second chances. He'd walked away from an empire to be here, had dismantled everything he'd built to become the father Mila deserved, and looking at her peaceful face, at the trust she placed in him despite having every reason not to, Adrian knew he'd made the right choice. The only choice, really, because empires fell and money disappeared and power meant nothing in the end. But this small girl dreaming of dragons and birthday parties, this life built on showing up and being present and choosing love over everything else, this was the greatest thing Adrian Cole would ever build. This was home. This was family. This was everything that mattered. And he'd spend the rest of his life proving worthy of it.